Good evening. I will call the meeting to order for the regular board meeting for Richland School District 2 School Board this Tuesday, July 21st, 2020. May I have a motion with regard to executive session?
Mr. Chair, I move to convene an executive session for the purpose of discussing an employee termination appeal.
Second.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of recessing public session and convening executive session for the purpose of employee termination appeal, please register your vote.
Vote is 7-0.
Thank you. The motion carries. We will now go into executive session. Thank you. Good evening again. We're back in open session, and I will entertain a motion to come out of executive session and resume public session at this time.
Mr. Chair,
Mrs. Mackey?
I move that we let the record state that we adjourned executive session at 4:42 p.m. today.
Is it your motion that we end executive session and resume public session?
Yes, that is my official motion, that we officially end executive session in which we concluded our business at 4:42 p.m.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion? Seeing none, if you can register your vote at this time.
The vote is 7-0.
Thank you. So I wanted to announce that we came out of executive session where we discussed an employee termination appeal matter. And now we'll move to item 3.1, inspirational moment and pledge of allegiance. Mrs. Mackey has graciously accepted the call to handle our inspirational moments for this year. And so now we'll turn it over to Mrs. Mackey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce a special guest we have this evening. It's Shonda Jefferson, who is the reigning South Carolina Teacher of the Year, and she's was an educator in Fairfield County, but she's gotten an elevation in her post as of next year. So I know you have another meeting this evening, Ms. Jefferson, but thank you for taking the time to be with us this evening and share some words of inspiration. A little bit about Ms. Jefferson. She's a native of Beach Island, South Carolina, which is near Aiken County. She attended the University of South Carolina, where she received her Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences in 2009 and her Master's in Teaching Secondary Sciences in 2011. She's a recent grad of Columbia University, North Carolina, New York, where she received a Master of Education in Public School Building Leadership. She's taught in the public schools of South Carolina for 9 years, and as a teacher, she's developed programs to increase student achievement and served in a number of leadership roles in her school and district. She continually searches for her innovative ideas and strategies to positively impact the lives of students and encourages students to follow their dreams. Ms. Jefferson has received many honors and accolades throughout her career. In May of 2019, most notably, she was named the 2020 South Carolina Teacher of the Year, where she served as an ambassador and advocate for educators and students in South Carolina. She encourages all educators to use their stories, their student stories, and their voices to advocate for positive change in education. Ms. Jefferson was most recently named a 2021 Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator and will spend the next year working on Capitol Hill. How about that? Congratulations. And she's also a very kind and gracious person, and I'm glad to have her here to share a bit of her positive energy. Ms. Jefferson.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Richland County School District 2 Board of Education and to Superintendent Davis for allowing me to speak tonight, and special thanks to Amelia Mackey for the invitation. This year, I had the opportunity to travel around the state and celebrate South Carolina teachers. But I spent a lot of time in Richland too, because I live right across from the R2I2 building. And I partnered with our neighborhood Chick-fil-A to deliver sweet surprises to teachers and staff each month in Richland 2 and Fairfield County School District. When I pulled up to the different schools in the Chick-fil-A cow van, everyone was excited, and it's not because I was a South Carolina Teacher of the Year. It's because they knew that every time we pulled up in that van, they were receiving some free Chick-fil-A. Every time that I entered into one of your schools, I was greeted with a warm welcome by the principals, faculty, and staff. So thank you all for welcoming me in with opening arms. As a moment of inspiration, I am going to share the story of the babies. There was once a carpenter that lived by the big river in a town near you. Every day with his trusty hammer, he built boats out of wood. One day, as the carpenter was working, he looked out onto the river and saw a child trying to swim to shore. "Help," said the child. The current was too strong, so the carpenter grabbed a boat and rescued the child. "How did you get into the river?" asked the carpenter. "I fell in upstream," said the child. The next day, when the carpenter looked onto the river, he saw two children struggling to swim towards the shore. "Help, help," said the children. The carpenter called out to another villager, and together they rescued the children. But the next day, there were 5 children, and the next day, there were a dozen. And soon the whole village was busy rescuing children from the village. The villagers grew weary, and some of the boats started to leak and break from overuse. The carpenter worked tirelessly to repair them, but as the number of children in the river grew, soon there weren't enough boats to get the job done. One day, the carpenter asked himself a question. Why and how are so many children falling into the river in the first place? So he bravely ran upstream to find out. There he saw a big windy village with many houses, and some of the houses were in a state of despair. And when the wind blew especially hard, the houses creaked and cracked, and things were swept out into the nearby river. Sometimes children were even swept out. The carpenter saw an old lady walking by, and he said, "Excuse me, do you know why these houses are so broken down?" And the lady said, "The people of the village want to fix these houses so that they can resist the wind, but we don't have the tools to do so. And lately the wind has been especially strong." "I can help," said the carpenter. With the help of the old lady, he gathered the villagers, showed them his hammer, and taught them how to use it so that they could learn to make their houses strong when the wind blew especially hard, and to keep their children from falling into the river. As school board members, be like the carpenter and continue to make the effort to go upstream and help build strong foundations there. Just as the carpenter asked the old lady questions about the children and why they were falling into the river, seek input and solutions from teachers so you don't need to work so hard to rescue the children downstream. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed education as we once knew it. Utilize this moment to reimagine the educational landscape in your schools and school district by making every effort to address issues such as equity, access, funding, and the value and respect for educators that have been brought to the forefront during this time. Thank you.
If you'll take us into the Pledge of Allegiance.
And now, will you stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much, Ms. Jefferson. Thank you, Ms. Mackey. And now we'll move on to item 4.1, approval of agenda. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Mackey,
I move to approve the agenda for the July 21st, 2020 regular board meeting of the Richland 2 School Board of Trustees.
thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, second by Dr. Caution Parker. Any discussion? All right. All those in favor, do so by registering your vote. Or opposed?
The vote is 6-1.
Thank you. Motion carries 6-1. Now we'll move on to item 5.1 specifically, approval of consent agenda. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move that we
Manning.
approve the consent agenda for the July 21st, 2020 regularly scheduled board meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Dr. Holmes. Any discussion? Seeing none, please register your vote.
Seven zero.
Thank you. Now we move down to item 6.1, public participation. And Dr. Davis and Ms. Ruth, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I have helpers in here. Give me just one more second. I'm having some. Okay. Y'all hear me okay? Y'all can nod. All right, Mr. Chair, we received 60 online forms for public participation. Technically, we received 63, but a couple of people submitted multiple forms, but I combined those into one, but still staying within our 3-minute time limit. Speaking of the 3-minute time limit, the character count was limited so that I would be able to ensure I could read all the comments or a given comment within 3 minutes, which is the time limit that is set forth according to policy BEDH. We had a mixture of comments and questions. And as is our practice for public participation during in-person meetings, we will not stop and answer the questions during public participation. However, we have made every effort to answer questions from public participation during the presentation tonight regarding reopening schools that Dr. Shealy will present a little later. Additionally, I'm tracking all the questions, and with the ones we are not able to answer tonight, we will make sure we get answered and share those with the individuals who submitted them. Also, these questions are very helpful in us building our frequently asked questions on the website regarding reopening schools. All but one comment was dealing with the reopening of schools. So now I'm going to read through, and I will do just like the board. I will call out the name of the person as well as the, and then read the comment. Kimberly Simpson. Please take into consideration the children who have health issues that prevent them from wearing a mask, as well as teachers and staff with underlying health issues. Children are our most valuable gift, and we must protect them at all times. The only option for reopening should be virtual learning. Cases are higher now than they were in March when school was closed. I applauded our district for making a swift decision to close. Reopening and expecting children to attend face-to-face would be a very risky and poor decision. From Jabitha Jones, and please forgive me if I mispronounce names. I will do my absolute best. Good evening. I'm a new parent of a child in Richland 2 schools, and I have been reading all the drafts on the schools reopening, and frankly, I am not okay with the phases presented. No one, including government, have any real plans in place for the people, and I, as a parent, with all the facts that has been been presented from this pandemic is very scary. No one truly knows the facts of this virus, and I'm not comfortable using my child as a test dummy, and as school officials, you shouldn't be okay with it either. Your lives are also at risk. Erin Manning. As a parent of 4 children in District 2, I feel we as a whole should be taking the necessary precautions for the safety of our children. Our family does not feel safe at all sending our children back for face-to-face learning. We need to keep in mind that our teachers are at risk as well. COVID-19 cases continue to soar, so we must not endanger our children or teachers. The only option that will ensure safety is e-learning. I urge you all to please put the health and safety of students and staff first by giving us the option to choose what we feel is the safest way for the children to continue learning. Thanks. Veronica Baron. How will children get the opportunity to test for alert if they were not already in that program in the beginning of last year, since there was no standardized testing? Wendy Hughes. Will teachers have a choice on whether they would like to teach virtually or in person? Is there a plan to support students without internet access, 504s, and IEPs? When will IEPs that began last year but couldn't be completed due to the pandemic be resumed? Regina Ford. How can you be sure that children the ages of 5 to 7 will be able to keep a mask on their face for 6 to 7 hours a day without taking it off numerous times throughout the day? If a child comes to school coughing or sneezing, how would you all handle disinfecting the classroom and materials in the classroom? If the children is what matters, why open the schools in August or September? Why not October, especially when no one knows which child or children have been around others who have had or have COVID-19? Chloe Caldwell. What happens to the children with IEPs if we are not given the in-person teaching choice? Janice Harper. If a child is repeating a course to raise a D or F from this past year for purposes of the GPA, he must remain at his current district school per policy or take the course via virtual SC. D or failing grades would remain on the student's GPA record if he switches to the new online school rather than in person and at his current school. This policy needs to be amended to allow students to keep their higher grade for repeated courses for those who repeat via online e-school. Many students are in this situation due to confusion over online learning and technical issues this past spring. Not sure if this policy needs to be addressed by the local board or State Board of Education. Barbara Reggio. Your board cannot meet in person due to restrictions on public gatherings. To open schools and mandate that my child participate in any form of in-person gathering would be hypocritical and a death sentence to medically fragile members of my family. Please keep all schools virtual for 2020-2021. Thank you. Katherine Williams. First, thank you for your continued support of the faculty and staff in the district. When might teachers find out if they will be selected for teaching year-long e-learning or required to return to the community model when in phase 2? Also, what are the plans and protocols that will be in place if a student or teacher were to be exposed or diagnosed with COVID-19? Tracy Adota. Will all kids receive a Chromebook? I have a first grader and I'm on oxygen, so sending her back is not an option for us. Also, what about the internet? Is it true that schools are providing mobile hotspots to each child? And Tracy sent a few questions in. We did remote hard packed learning last year. Is that e-learning? And would we still use Chromebooks provided by the school? How and when will we know where each child will be placed? And is it true that parents with no internet will receive a mobile hotspot to keep at home, as some have no ride to mobile hotspot sites? Robert Wise. I know any choice or choices you make will be difficult and affect thousands of families. It seems in today's America, most people are intolerant of anyone whose thoughts are not the same as theirs. If you're unsure of this, please read the hateful comments on your own Richland 2 pages. Not everyone fits in the same position my wife and I have been lucky enough to work through this pandemic and really need for both both our kids to be in school. Not having face-to-face instruction 5 days a week will put our family with an impossible choice: to work and put food on our table, or one of us quit so we can stay home and educate our children. One comment on your Facebook page really offended me as a parent. It was from a teacher from Richland too. It said that we only want to use the schools as daycare. I would like you to think, what would your parents have done if they had to quit their job because you weren't allowed to go to school? What would your lives now look like? What would all the staff and teachers' lives look like if they were not able to attend school? The facts are, we do not know if and when a vaccine will come into fruition. Hopefully soon, but that's a big if. I don't want anyone to force their kid to go back to school if their parents are uncomfortable doing so, but like I said at the beginning, not everyone is able to make that choice. I worry about the kids of today. I hope they will be more understanding and tolerant of everyone, and not those who think like them, but with the way parents and teachers are acting, I worry. Wendy Hughes. Now that students have opportunities to attend schools virtually, will there be opportunities to participate in more than one program from more than one school? For instance, early college at Ridgeview and cosmetology at Richland Northeast. If not, what would hinder these opportunities from being available? Andrea Almond. At this time, as a parent, I believe it's important to focus on the safety of the kids and staff of our schools. I have 2 children in the Richland school system, one in elementary and the other going to middle school next year. Our home has 3 people in it that are high risk due to lung damage, my elementary child being one. I get that these kids should be old enough to obey us and put a mask on, but come on, be realistic. I, as an adult, dislike wearing a mask and take mine off every chance possible. Why would we desire to risk not only the kids' health, but everybody they come in contact with hoping that they are better than us as adults keeping a mask on? I, for one, will be opting to maintain e-learning, and if not offered, I may withdraw and enroll in a homeschool program until it's safe to return to traditional schooling. Lisa Henry. What number of students will be in each of the small communities as in classroom option pre-K through grade 5? Sally Zimmer. If a teacher tests positive while class is in session, do all the children have to stay home the 10 days to be quarantined as well, and then have to wait to be tested with a negative in order to be able to report back to class? Will the children be broken off in groups of like 10 in pre-K or kindergarten, while the teacher and assistant work with them individually in each group to keep the spread to a minimum? What efforts will be made for special need kiddos who are unable to keep masks on, that are hyperactive, fidgety, or just won't keep it on? Will there still be after-school homerooms for classroom work only, not sports, while parents go to work? Will buses run half-day or every other day for students due to seating arrangements? James Brown. For in-person learning, how are you going to handle special education students, especially the ones that are unable to wear face coverings? How will the virtual learning be different for those same students from what was done in the spring? Sharon Dottie, or Dowdy. Again, I apologize for the names. If my child starts with the virtual classroom, can they switch back to in-person classes if situations improve and safety protocols prove to work? Jennifer Irwin. If Richland 2 wants more students participating in the R2E program, they might want to consider letting students return to their current choice program schools after participating in the R2E program for the 2020-2021 school year. Many parents might not want to participate in the R2E program during the COVID-19 threat for fear that their choice student will have to return to their zone school and no longer be able to rejoin the friends and classmates once the current health threat has dissipated. Adam Stone. In the event that the entirety of semester 1 is held online in consequence of the high rate by South Carolina DHEC, are there plans to start some type of in-person instruction semester 2? If not, are teachers wholly prepared to teach a whole academic year virtually? Janet Green. I have been following the guideline, and my whole family of 10 has COVID. Excuse me, let me start over. I have been following the guideline. My whole family of 10 has COVID-19. This COVID-19 is the worst thing in our 55 years of living. People are losing their lives. We can't risk lives for what kids put their hands in their mouth, rub their nose if they are sick and not showing any symptoms. Now that they have infected the others, and now when they go home, they infect the household, and the older go to work. Now they're infecting other unknown because it takes days for it to show up. My family is suffering for this deadly virus. Katherine Molino. If a teacher contracts COVID, will they have to use their own personal sick days for a mandatory quarantine? Will the district have days set aside so teachers do not have to use their saved personal sick days? Also, as for substitute shortage that was seen prior to COVID, what happens when a teacher is forced to quarantine and there isn't an available substitute to cover the class? Will students be sprinkled in other classes? Mr. Chad, I'm going to take just a moment. My tech person is in here. I just want to make sure everything's okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Sir. I don't know. It's just helping me make sure I catch the comments. All good. He was just checking on me. Sorry about that. Tara Giles. Dr. Davis and the board, I'm a veteran military spouse teacher who desperately wants to be back with my children in the CFCD classroom. I completed 16 rounds of chemotherapy, 25 rounds of radiation, and have spent every week working one-on-one with a conscious discipline teacher this summer to prepare for the school year. As a military spouse, I'm always the newbie in any district. I adapt to each school district's expectations, and now I'm forced to decide if I go to school and teach elementary kids or find a sitter to watch my kids while they remote learning from home. Wouldn't be a big deal, however, they are low IQ children with disabilities. I don't view school as a babysitter. I pay after school care, no problem. However, how do we reach and help our SPED kids? Lakeisha Mitchell. I would like to let my child stay at home because he has health issues and plus the younger kids are getting it faster. Martha Brown. If a teacher tests positive for COVID-19, are they required to quarantine for 2 to 3 weeks? Is their sick leave covered, paid? If that teacher has 5 classes a day with 30 students each, do all 150 of those students need to stay home and quarantine for 14 days? Do all 150 of those students now have to get tested? Who pays for those tests? Are they happening at school? How are the parents being notified? Does everyone in each of those kids' families need to get tested? Who pays for that? What if someone who lives in the same house as a teacher tests positive? Does that teacher now need to take 14 days off work to quarantine? Is that time covered, paid? Where is the district going to find substitute teacher who will work in a classroom full of exposed, possibly infected students for substitute pay? Substitutes teach in multiple schools. What if they are diagnosed with COVID-19? Do all the kids exposed in each school now have to quarantine and get tested? Who is going to pay for that? What if a student is in your kid's class tests positive? What if your kid tests positive? Does every other student and teacher have to be quarantined? Do we all get notified who is infected and when? Or because of HIPAA regulations, are parents and teachers just going to get mysterious, may have been in contact emails all year long? What is the stress going to do to our teachers? How does it affect their health and well-being? How does it affect their ability to teach? How does it affect the quality of education they are able to provide? What is it going to do to our kids? What are the long-term effects of consistently being stressed out? How will it affect students and faculty when the first teacher in the school dies from this? When the first parent of a student who brought it home dies? When the first child dies? Joseph Lamar. Thanks to the task force for putting our students and teachers first. I was wondering, even if students cannot report back to classrooms due to the high number of COVID-19 cases, would we, teachers, be allowed to teach from classrooms using the technology that has been provided to us? I think this would give teachers ease of access to their equipment and resources when needed. This would help teachers with internet issues and provide an ideal teaching space. Michelle Pryor. How will school-based e-learning be different? Are the school hours going to be altered, or is after-school programs going to be open? Do y'all have protocols in place if one of the teachers or students is infected? Are the teachers going to be tested prior to returning to the classroom? My 6-year-old asked me how will she eat around others and remain safe because she has to remove her mask. Gus Phillips. Members of the board, this comment is submitted by Gus Philpott. I would like for the board to answer this question this evening, either at the end of public participation segment or during the board and superintendent comments, or by email reply tomorrow. When a member of the public sends a question by email to the board chair and the topic is not one that can be delegated to the superintendent or staff, how soon should the member of the public expect to reply? Christy Hartwell. Thank you for all you have done. If I am able to, I would like to ask a question. Will the hours change for elementary classes during phase 1? For example, will they end the day early because there will not be time for recess, and if there are no related arts classes? Tanisha Brooks. I would like to know how will the changing of classes for high school students work, and will they have to wear masks? I said, I'd also like to know more about virtual learning. I do not feel my son will attend school because even as a government employee, I have not returned to work and I am not working remotely. I think we need to take into consideration all the plans, especially from the middle school students who have to change classes. I would suggest requiring the teachers to move from room to room instead of the students. That would help with the congestion in the school and keep them safe for those who are returning. Pauline Natasha Irvin Lewis. Please provide more information regarding children participating accepted into the choice program, e-learning, virtual learning. Kathy Carroll. If someone who lives in the same house as the teacher tests positive, does that teacher now need to take 14 days off of work to quarantine? Is that time off covered or paid? Gail Ford. Did you apply for pandemic EBT benefits for District 2? If not, why not? Marty Brown. I am concerned about news reports that says children 10 and over can spread the coronavirus as much as adults. That was from New York Times. And that coronavirus may cause infertility in males, Journal of the American Medical Association. With new information coming out about previously unknown effects of the coronavirus and South Carolina's rising infection numbers, I hope the board will agree that it is in the best interest of students, teachers, and staff to return to e-learning until our numbers decrease to a manageable level. See articles referenced here. Cameron Cornlew, sorry. Good evening. I appreciate collective efforts by Richland 2 for a safe school reopening. As a physician parent, I share the concerns regarding health and safety of students and the staff. The key element is clearly facial covering and physical distancing. Studies are suggesting that teenagers can transmit the virus as nearly as the adults. My main concern is the enforcement of these basic CDC guidelines in this age group. It may be helpful to create educational video clips for students' parents. Virtual teaching proved to be ineffective in the spring nationwide, but in my opinion, they are the safest way to start the school year. Perhaps more emphasis on student attendance and engagement and overall improvement of quality of virtual classes can help. In-person education can be gradually implemented after 3 to 4 weeks, subject to the behavior of the outbreak in our state, particularly in the Midlands. Thank you for your time. Or thanks for your time, sorry. Clyde Williams. My concern is about safety for both students and teachers alike, and feel that if we do not include protective plexiglass on 2 sides of the student's desk and 3 sides of the teacher's desk, we would fall short of doing all we can do to ensure we have done all that we could do to protect against COVID-19. My son and I, while at a store, were talking about what it would look like in the classroom when school starts up, and noticed the shield plexiglass and thought it would be a good idea in the classrooms. If a focus group is formed to consider the idea, I would like to participate in the research. To Tanisha Frazier. What is the metric guideline for reopening of brick and mortar schools, i.e. overall number of cases in South Carolina or the county? What protocol is in place should a student, teacher, administrator, other staff, parent, or sibling of a student test positive for COVID-19? How will classes work for students in alert, speech, resource, or etc.? Paul Jones. Due to the recent reports of COVID-19 being spread easily between 11 and 9-year-olds, I'm concerned about sending my children back to school. Also, South Carolina COVID cases continue to rise. Kristen McGuire. As a mom of 3 in Richland 2 and a teacher at the district, I absolutely support the district's plan to follow DHEC guidelines when planning for instruction. With the county's infection and transmission rates considered in the high category, it is my hope that we begin virtually until deemed safe by public health officials. I want my children to return to the classroom as soon as possible, but only when considered safe by scientists and public health official standards. Miranda Bright. To start back to school in person at this time is not a good idea. Cases are going up each day, people are not wearing masks and practicing social distancing. I feel by going back to school face-to-face is putting teachers, staff, and students' health and life at risk. My girls and I will miss seeing our school family this fall, but COVID-19 doesn't make this possible. Don't put money or politics before the health and life of others. The board is making the decision whether to have back to school in person over the internet. If it is not safe for you all to be inside a building, how is it safe for teachers, staff, and students? Mark Wood. What would you consider an acceptable number of student and teacher deaths in order to implement Government Master's demand that they return to face-to-face instruction 5 days a week? Moreover, what impetus can you provide to convince me that sending my son, who is a Richland 2 student, and my spouse, who is a Richland 2 educator, into an objectively dangerous environment? Tobias Tyler. My question is, what type of provisions are being put in place for those children who cannot afford the hand sanitizers or masks on a regular basis? Also, will virtual schooling still be offered throughout the remainder of the school year? Also, for those kids that need tutorial services and they're doing the virtual schooling, how will those services be provided to my son or daughter? Sorry, I had to check the waiting room real quick for our meeting. Christina Adams. What is R2's plan for IEP testing for updated goals this fall? What is the support program going to look like virtually? How will the school psychologist work with parents to coordinate testing? Will the district pay for and approve psychological testing by outside providers if unable to accommodate testing? If so, what are the test standards that the school uses? The goal is to provide free and appropriate education for kids with IEP 504, but without updated testing and updated goals, it leaves our special needs kids at a disadvantage without knowing their true potential. Sincerely, an active duty single mom with no family support in the area. David Taylor. Dear Board of Trustees, please start school in person for the following reasons. 1, my 15-year-old daughter with special needs cannot participate in e-learning and can therefore not participate in school or receive an appropriate education without 5 days in person. 2, my 17-year-old son does not want to return to Spring Valley High School unless he can return in person and run varsity cross country. He loves the school, but his grades and confidence diminished last spring. E-learning removed meaningful relationships with peers, teachers, coaches, and administrators for him, so he lost interest and his grades dropped. 3, my 12-year-old son has asked us not to make him go back to e-learning. He needs an in-person setting to keep his focus, and he wants badly to return to Blythewood Middle. Sadly, my 10-year-old daughter has already begun to grieve the loss of her 5th grade year at Lake Carolina. She said to my wife tonight, I know I'm only 10, but I hate e-learning. She is normally our high performer, but her A's dropped to C's last spring as she lost interest in school without being around people. The AAP report supports the decision to return in person because their view of health and wellness is multifaceted, considering more than just COVID-19. My kids have a happy home, but they are struggling unnecessarily with depression, grief, and lack of motivation. This is not what I want for my kids. I only have a few years left with them. 6, choice. I do so wish as a parent I could have a choice between in-person and virtual with Richland 2. We know that word, right? Choice. 7, it shows hustle and innovation to reopen in person. We moved to the Northeast Columbia 11 years ago to be part of this innovative school district. Our current wait-and-see approach does not convey hustle and innovation. We need to start day 1 in person so that we can set up enduring routines for everyone. It will be extremely frustrating to start one day and then switch again and then switch again. We will be safer for the long term by confidently establishing in-person safe routines right out of the gate. 9, starting with in-person instruction as an option conveys confidence in your own phase 2 plan. I disagree with the sentiment we can't regather safely. I want trust built by saying we can do this and here's how. If you start out day 1 with phase 2, you can practice with smaller crowds, earn trust, and let anxious families ease their way back. Finally, my wife and I understand their risk. Our daughter with special needs has a medical history of pneumonia, but the AAP is right. We can't eliminate risk, we can only mitigate risk. Your phase 2 plan does this, and I trust our principals and teachers to execute phase 2 and not forget 5 days for special education. I am asking you and trusting you to do just that. Be innovative, trust your principals, trust your teachers, trust all your staff, trust your parents and kids too. Distinguish Richland 2 from other districts. Ruben Navarrete. If there is no in-person learning, will kids go back to a grading scale instead of just a pass? It is the opinion of many parents that grades should be the same as before. This will increase the possibility of more failing students, but we cannot lower the bar. Do you agree? What will be done so that there is better participation from students to better emulate being in a real classroom for 6 to 7 hours? Kids and teachers need to be able to see that kids are all paying attention to class and actively participate. I am nervous about my kids' actual academic growth. A couple of them are gifted and feel like they will miss out on getting the appropriate challenge and a healthy competition with peers, excel in science, engineering, and math. What is the school district doing to assure kids' education isn't watered down due to the pandemic and e-learning? I have a rising kindergarten that will kindergartner. What will be done to guarantee that she comes out of kindergarten knowing how to read, write with moderately good penmanship, have social activities like she normally would? I am concerned that virtual kindergarten will not afford my 5-year-old the same education my previous child received. Why is there so much nervousness with opening schools when thousands of other workers around the city, state, and nation are back at work in many just as busy environments? Scientific peer review literature has shown grade school children transfer the virus less, and if they do get it more, it's like a strong cold. AAP and local pediatric associations have recommended opening of schools. Will kids who do not complete work on time participate in class, attend class, be graded just as they would in normal school, or would they get a pass because of the pandemic? If they do get a pass, isn't this setting up the future generation for failure and lowering education standards? If you disagree, why? Have you considered letting schools and their zone communities to decide what they think is best for them? Some areas might have better social structures and parental involvement than others and may be able to open up with less risk. Why can't there just be 2 options, e-learning and in-classroom learning? Let each parent decide what is best for their family and give teachers the option as well. Most likely you will have 50% of parents opting to e-learn anyway, so classrooms should be at half capacity, right? Thank you. Hopefully, at least some of these questions will be directly responded to. I would be glad to discuss any of these at more length. Tom Stetson. As a clinician, I feel strongly that children should return to school with no mask. David Overly. If teaching is done virtually, will teachers be online the full amount of time that they would normally be teaching? One of my daughters does not do well unless she has a teacher actually engaging with her. She needs a full day of teaching. I understand teachers are available to receive communication, but she needs actual face-to-face interaction. Teaching virtually is going to impair her ability to learn, and I care too much about her and my daughter's education to allow that. Amber Mascari. Excuse me. I have 2 kids, 1st and 2nd grade. Before I make decisions, I feel there are a lot of unanswered questions. Some are as followed. What is the plan if a child or teacher does test positive for COVID-19 after the schools resume in-person meeting? How do we determine yellow phase, and what notice will we have? Will we have to return to school day 2? We are in yellow. What happens if after we return to school we go back into a red phase of COVID-19? Who makes these determinations? At the yellow phase, will there be after-school care available? When will the parents be given more details about e-learning or remote learning? Will the students be required to be online for 1-hour blocks, 6-hour, etc.? Will there be additional STEAM-related activities, breaks, lunch? Will there be one-on-one time scheduled for the students to meet with teachers? For magnet curriculum, will there be magnet e-learning? At the elementary level, there are suggestions to how long children should be online for health reasons. Have these been addressed in the remote learning plans? What is the commitment going to look like on the parents to assist in the learning versus how much is on the teachers? How can we find out answers to our questions about curriculum, safety measures at our specific schools, etc., before we make our decisions? If we are having concerns about teachers, emotional health, curriculum, etc., how can we get in touch with other school resources to get these addressed? Will other school services be available remotely? What is the plan to assess and measure student performance over the year? How will it be determined if a child has grown over the year, and how will it be determined the child has completed the competencies to be able to move to the next level? If assessments or standardized tests are needed, will these be conducted in person, at the school, or remotely? Kamara DeSalle. How will teachers be protected? What are the COVID-19 plans for substitutes? Toyah Jones. How will schools handle families having internet connectivity issues with multiple children using their Chromebooks for Zoom sessions? Cassandra Stefan. If my daughter starts school with e-learning, will she automatically stay in e-learning, or can she go in the 2nd phase of school? Liz Gibbs. In previous years, siblings in the same grade, i.e. twins or multiples, have not been allowed to be in the same class. Student safety is a big concern going into the school year because of COVID, and as such, parents should have the option of placing their twins or multiples in the same class. When classes are in person, it will reduce the number of students they are exposed to. If there is any remote learning, it would be easier for parents to coordinate schedules and virtual class meetings. Has the board put any thought into how multiples should be handled this year? Will the policy of separating multiples be relaxed this year based on current conditions? Aisha Perez. My husband and I have several questions. During last night's e-school webinar, it was mentioned that parents will receive a form perhaps this week or the beginning of next week to select the appropriate option for their families for the new school year. It was also mentioned that the e-school program is still selecting teachers for the program, doesn't have a list of courses at this time, and it was unsure exactly how many openings there will be for each grade. It ranged from 20 students initially before they realized the need in the community to now possibly 300. How can a parent make an informed decision and commit to a year of e-school without knowing these details, including the list of courses offered, who the teachers are, and the slots that are available? Also, last night was the first time that I heard or seen that e-school was primarily for students and families that have health concerns due to COVID-19 that make returning physically to school a challenge, i.e. they or someone in their family is considered high risk. How will this be verified on the e-school application? Are you going to ask each family for health information to prove that they are high risk? It was also briefly mentioned last night that school-based e-learning could continue for the entire school year if a parent chooses that for their child. But as we move to phase 2 and beyond and more children go back to school, it could affect the students in the e-learning environment and they may be combined with other children. Could you explain this in more detail? What exactly happens if a small number of children in each school want to continue e-learning all year? Will they continue to have the same classes with the same teacher? I find it unfair to offer e-learning for a full year if it is not going to be a stable option for students. These are just some of the questions and concerns that we have, and we are afraid that we are not being given enough information to really make an informed decision for our family. Rhonda Nichols. How and if children return to school, will children be separated during the day? Kurt Muller. I thank you for taking time to read this. I am entering into my 4th year teaching at Dent Middle, and I love where I teach, what I teach, 8th grade science, and who I teach, 2 academies. I thought a long time about a possible solution to the quandary of returning and face-to-face instruction. I know District 2 prides itself on being a district of innovation, but if we are considering a return to face-to-face instruction, I believe we need to look to what Fairfield County schools are doing in order to bring students back. Currently, Fairfield County schools are planning to offer face-to-face instruction to the students that need it the most. That means students without internet access, students with special needs, students in need of remediation. Those students who do not fall into one of these categories can be brought back at a later time when it is safe to do so, and face-to-face instruction can be offered to all. I thank you for your time, and thank you for allowing me to continue to teach at Dent. Maureen Quillen. Richland 2 should give the option of in-person learning 5 days a week. Online learning is not providing the same education that in-person learning provides. I asked my son in the 7th grade at the INC program what he thought of the online learning. He stated he felt he was not learning anything and most of it was just busy work. There was very little teacher interaction and limited help for these students. He sat at home in front of the computer looking at videos and doing worksheets. There were no Zoom classes, no teacher follow-up. It was disappointing that a school system that values education would provide substandard online learning. Children need social interaction. Children need structure. I am a single working mother. I cannot stay home with my son to make sure he gets up at a certain time. He signs in at a certain time. We are creating virtual dropouts and creating more of an economic and educational divide. Children have extremely low rates of COVID infection and even lower rates of mortality. The overall mortality rates, even for adults with COVID, is less than 1%. Mortality rates with the flu is higher. Why are we sacrificing our children's education and future just to make some adults feel safer? I, like many parents, want the option to send my child back to school full-time for in-person learning. Let me make the choice. Jennifer Webb. My heart goes out to all the parents and staff of Richland 2 who need to decide what to do for this coming school year. E-learning is the safest option with the current COVID-19 presence in our community. However, due to many reasons, e-learning is just not a viable option for many families. Those who can make e-learning work should do it while COVID-19 is prevalent in our area. However, there should be an option of in-person school so those who really don't have the option of staying home can have a safe place to be. The problem is using the current model and making schools COVID-19 friendly is a big challenge with teachers, especially having a high risk of getting sick. With students divided into grades and or subjects and families with multiple children spread across the board, this can quickly become a logistical nightmare and a safety concern. In these unprecedented times, we need to get creative and think outside the box. My suggestion is to take a one-room schoolhouse approach and put families together in the same classroom. 2 teachers of different grade levels would be assigned to each classroom, rotating between teaching the in-person students and teaching the online students. Depending on the size of the families, this would mean 8 to 10 families would come in contact with just 2 teachers instead of each teacher coming in contact with 25 or more families, depending on the grade level. Contaminant and contact tracing would be way easier and less students and teachers would need to be quarantined in an outbreak. Yes, this model would require teachers to move away from teaching every single standard. However, there's a benefit from teaching with real-life scenarios that can be accessed by a large range of students. One such benefit is the great potential for students to gain important critical thinking and creativity skills needed in today's world. Yes, there's a limited amount of time to implement something like this, but if everyone works together and thinks outside the box, a solution can be found for those who need it most. Ella Mack. If my child starts out virtually and I see the need to send him face-to-face, can I change? Also, can I choose to send my senior and keep my middle schooler home virtually? Kelly Jackson. I would like to know if the district would require all staff and returning students to have COVID-19 tests before any reopening. Who will fund and who will give oversight in conducting the follow-up measures? Has district or Molly Spearman consulted with all medical staff within the communities for their medical advice? Reopening too soon or without serious protection in place will collapse hospitals. This is not New York City, Chicago, or Los Angeles. The southern states lack horribly in infrastructure to function with this pandemic. Number 3, hypothetically, a staff member or student said to a student contracts COVID-19. Do the powers that be understand that a majority of our students' living arrangements are multi-generational lower income? This is quickly spread within our communities who are already at a disadvantage. How do we help these families and students then? Mr. Shad, that concludes public participation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Roof, for that valiant effort. We appreciate all the comments from members of our public and Ms. Roof taking on the task of going through those. Get you some water. And so now we'll move on to item 7.1, employee termination appeal. Is there a motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Manning?
In the employee termination appeal reviewed by the board in executive session, I move that the board uphold the administration's decision to terminate the employee.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Agostini. Is there any discussion? All right. Now to the point of question. Please register your vote at this time.
Vote is 7-0.
All right, thank you. There were no other items, so 7.2 is inapplicable at this time. We will now move on to item 8.1 under new business, no action requested. Policy proposal BEDGA board records. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I believe we will have Dr. Marshalyn Franklin share with you the ins and outs of this policy. But as you recall, we had brought this policy before the board at a previous board meeting. And so this is the second reading of this policy. And then the administration is asking the board for its approval of the policy. So if there be any questions, again, we've already presented this policy to you for first reading, and this is the second reading of this policy and asking for approval.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mrs. Agostini.
I am looking at my agenda, and my agenda says new business, no action requested. Item 8.1, am I on the wrong policy?
Yes, ma'am. It does say that, but it does appear, like Dr. Davis said, that that is actually, it shouldn't be in that section. It should be for action, since this would be the second reading.
I would say that, Mr. Chair, I would say that since it is listed in this section, that we accept it as new business, no action requested, and just have a simple discussion as reading for the board. It doesn't matter if we do a first reading, second reading, or third reading at this time. And since it's placed in this section for simplicity purposes and consistency of following the expectations as the agenda has outlined, And for lack of conflict, I would suggest that the school board review this policy, and then we'll bring the policy back for second reading.
Mr. Chair, I agree with that recommendation to just have it for review and not for vote, particularly since it's been publicized this way. We don't have a way to take action on it today.
Thank you. Dr. Elkins?
Yes, just a question for Dr. Davis. Want to make sure that I'm clear on this policy. Is it stating that if one of the board members would like to get information, that we would have to get a vote from our colleagues to get information?
Dr. Elkins Johnson, I think it depends on the type of information that is. It depends on the type of information that is requested. And so, for simplicity, I think for transparency purposes, I'll share the policy as stated for those who are viewing, and then allow you all to have the appropriate discussion that you need. Requests by members of the board. Since the board assumes a leadership role in maintaining a system of public education and function primarily as a legislative body to formulate and adopt policy, individual board members are extended special considerations in obtaining information. Under normal circumstances, requests to inspect and or receive copies of records should be made by individual board members to the superintendent, who may refer such requests to the communications department. These particular requests will be processed whenever possible in a more expeditious manner than otherwise required by law and at no cost to the individual board member. All board members will be appropriately advised of all requests as well as the responses. If, on the other hand, the requests are determined by the superintendent to be unusual in nature by reason of their content, subject matter, volume, or /size, then they should be referred by the superintendent to the board. The superintendent will require that such requests be made in writing upon affirmative action by the board. All requested information and available written documents, once again, will be provided to the board member as expeditiously as possible. Individual board members may request information as a member of the general public in accordance with the provision of the Freedom of Information Act. And so if the request is deemed, so for a traditional, basic, normal, simple request, this policy is stating that you will be granted that information. If it's, but that request in writing will be shared, and that response will be shared with all board members. The second part of this policy states, though, however, if the superintendent deems that this request is unusual in nature, and by reason of that content, subject matter, volume, or size, then they should be, this will be referred to the board, and the board will make the determination if that information is granted.
Okay.
But the third part of that, then that board member then couldn't have, of course, has the ability to utilize the Freedom of Information Act to receive any information that they think is necessary for them.
Okay, so is this a policy that we created in Richland too, or is this something that the School Board Association felt like we should have? And also, if it's something we created, is it something that we pass through our legal system to make sure that this is something that's legal that we can do? And I'm asking that question only because I know that we're all elected officials. And with that being said, as an elected official, we have the right to ask questions. So I'm just trying to figure out.
This policy was created by our legal counsel.
Okay.
And no, it's not a policy that is in multiple, and that other boards may have adopted. This would be this. There is a similar policy, I think, that this was drafted from, but this policy was created for us specifically because we had an issue as it relates to the nature of a request by a board member.
Okay. Thank you.
Other board members?
Mr. Chair.
Mrs. Agostini?
Yeah, I have several questions. Thank you. And actually, I think it was, I've taken a lot of time to look and research this policy, and Lexington Richland 5 had something very similar. Horry County did as well. I'm more inclined to go with Lancaster County, who said basically our doors are open, come on in, we'll give you anything you want. But for probably looking at about 30 or 40 different school districts, I did not see this policy, but this is pretty much verbatim what Lexington Richland 5 has. But, my first question is, who commissioned this policy?
I'll let Mr. Manning address that question.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Manning?
Thank you. Yes, this was drafted, Ms. Agostini. I think there was a request actually that you had submitted to the superintendent. There was some debate as to whether the request was reasonable or not between superintendent, myself, and you. And it was an issue that escalated to the point where we actually talked to our attorneys to determine how do we do this in an equitable way going forward to make sure that the needs of the board members are met, but also understand the line for administration and reasonable requests by board members. So this policy was recommended from legal counsel to address the issue, and it, in my opinion, is done in such a way that it really formalizes how we've always operated, but it puts it into a policy to formalize it so that it's more fair and consistent to both board members and fair and consistent for administration to understand how the process should work when administration feels that the request is either unreasonable or that it goes beyond the line of board member into administrative issues. So that's the reason behind it, and I, as board chair, authorized this being drafted to address that issue.
So we wouldn't
at the time.
We wouldn't need a board vote to get this. We're saying that we need a board vote to get information, but as a board chair, you could make the decision to commission an attorney to write a policy that is not requested by the majority of the board.
The board chair can and superintendent can have any policy drafted. Whether it's approved or not is an issue of the entire board. And what this policy says is not the routine request will be voted on by the board, but I promise you, over my many years, I'm the current longest serving board member, active longest serving board member, and we have had issues in the past prior to you coming on the board, Ms. Agostini, where there were questions about reasonableness of requests, including requests that I myself had given to the administration. And it was always a practice, but never in policy as to how we address that. We act as a body, and there are standard requests that administration gives to us, but there are some that, because of, as it says in the policy, the subject matter, the volume, the size of the request, that it really needs to be a board vote because it can drain district resources or be unreasonable. Therefore, the board as a whole can request it if voted upon in those particular cases, which are rare, but they do occur.
Oh, and thank you for making the comment or making reference. And just for the record, for public knowledge, at our January special called board meeting, I did ask a question as it pertained to the approval of a new business action requested general fund budget amendment for the 2019-2020 fiscal year, where I asked if the money needed to be spent by the end of June 2020. The answer was it does not. Weeks later, I found out from some media specialists that, in fact, they were given communications that were contradictory and to what was asked in that board meeting where we all approved it. And so I did request to see the memo because, in my opinion, it is part of board governance of when and how and where money is spent, that we all need to be abreast of that. Just those comments. But my final, and I'm disappointed that our legal counsel isn't here, because my final question is this legal? Do we have a court ruling or an attorney general opinion that this is actually legal?
Our attorney's not here, but our attorney, and Dr. Davis, you can answer, but they helped us to draft this policy. They've reviewed the policy as it's stated, thereby stating that they feel that it is legal. And as you stated, Ms. Agostini, it is in practice in other school districts already. You stated Lexington Richland 5 had a similar policy in place, I believe, when we started this.
As I was going to state that as well, Ms. Agostini has already stated for the record that other boards in the state, as she's in her research, has shown that this policy does exist in other school boards. So it's not a unique policy to us, although the wording may not. But as she stated, the wording is verbatim. I'd also like to state, just for the record and a point of clarification for the public as well, indeed, I did respond to that request or that question that money had to be spent, did not have to be spent, and legally and technically it did not. It would have required us for us to have a vote in order for us to carry that money forward. And so if that money had not been spent, we would have come back to this board and asked for that opportunity to allow them to carry that money forward so that it could be spent in the next fiscal year. So it did not have to be spent. This policy came as a result of the superintendent's concerns about a board member asking for specific email from administration to staff. And so the question now I have to ask myself is, where is the line? What is not admissible or what is not acceptable for a board member to request an email from one staff member to another? And the superintendent needs certain safeguards and protections, and as part of the board member's ethical responsibility, those safeguards and protections are supposed to be put in place by the board in order for the superintendent to be able to do his duty, discharge his duties professionally throughout the school district, not in an adversarial relationship. The relationship, that information would then taken and then also shared and used as a part of a negative evaluation by said board member. And so we have to put certain safeguards in place as district administration. I don't want my principals to have to worry about whether or not they send an email to the teacher if that email is something that a board member can simply request because they have the responsibility or have been elected as an official to ask for an email from a principal to a teacher or an email from an assistant principal to another teacher or something like that, or to an instructional aide. There has to be some level of safeguard when it comes to doing our administrative duties and responsibilities.
Mr. Chair, my question that I had, it was related to a budget question, which we are responsible for. In terms of if it's legal, and I did cite that a school district has it, it doesn't mean that it is legal. And I just was looking for a legal opinion because I have a email from the Attorney General's office where they have sent me the Honorable Gail Ford, the Honorable Daryl Hudson, which was done on June 28th, 2019, that said that it was the latest opinion of the rights of school board members to have access to all information related to the operation of the school district over which the school board governs. I think you'll find this helpful. I'll send you by separate email the Wilson versus Preston case in which the Supreme Court of South Carolina confirmed our longstanding opinion that members of a public body must have access to information in order to do their jobs.
Mr. Chair.
Dr. Holmes?
Yes, I was sitting here listening to this, and I have to say this. I think it's important for the public to know that the board members, your job as a board member is not to run the day-to-day operations of a school. Your job is to be over the superintendent. And if you're not satisfied with the job that the superintendent does on a day-to-day basis, it is your job to replace the superintendent. I think when we start treading into areas of whether as a board member, I have a right to look at someone's email, that is in the day-to-day operations and goes beyond the scope of what a school board member should be doing. I don't care what it says when we go to training. When you first become a board member, it stipulates that your business is not the day-to-day running of a school. It is not to be on every situation and to look on every crevice and corner so you can find things to address. That's not your job. Your job is to make sure that the superintendent, the people that the superintendent hired, his staff, are people that are competent and can do the job. And if they're not, then it's not a one board member's decision. It is a unilateral board member's decision. And if the board has decided that the superintendent is incompetent, then he should be removed. But day-to-day operations and peering into individual teachers' email, as an educator myself, I would find that highly offensive. That's all, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Holmes. Any other discussion on proposed policy addition, BEDGA? All right, thank you. We will now move to item 8.2, policy proposal for Title IX. Dr. Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, and to our viewing public, we are proposing a second policy for Title IX. I will ask Ms. Williams, our Chief Human Resource Officer, to present this policy to the board for your review and for discussion. Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Dr. Davis, Mr. Chair and board. The United States Department of Education recently issued a new regulation regarding Title IX complaints related to allegations of sexual harassment in the schools. Attached is policy. It is initial draft, again, because this is brand new. We have coded it as code XXX into the School Board Association designate a letter for the policy. It outlines the definition of sexual harassment and outlines what the district is responsible for should a Title IX complaint come forward.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Williams. Board members?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Agostini.
I have one question. I'm just seeking clarity and trying to understand it, Ms. Williams. It's, I believe, page 5 under dismissal of complaint. The bullet points, the first set. There you go. So it says the complaint would be dismissed if allegations, does it need to be all 3 or just 1?
And the dismissal of complaint and bullet points number 3, is that correct?
Yes,
Just want to make sure.
the first set of bullet points where it says the complaint must be dismissed if the allegations.
This right here would be in compliance with what is outlined in the law.
No, I know, but I'm just wondering if it's 1 or if it pertains to all 3 of them.
Ms. Williams, if I may, there's an or after the second bullet, so I believe it's.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. And one other question, just the middle, the one in the middle did not occur in the district's education program or activity. So if something happened off campus with an employee and teacher, that would not be considered, or excuse me, a teacher and a student or an employee and a student, that would not be considered sexual harassment, or 2 employees?
That would be correct if it happened off property.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other board members? Okay. All right, thank you very much.
I would like to state, though, I think, and Ms. Williams, since you're on this call, to address, I think Ms. Agostini asked a good question. But we would still have the opportunity, we would still have the ability to termination or any other position against that employee for something like that, although it did not happen on school grounds because of conduct. So that is correct.
It could
conduct policy.
I'm sorry, it could fall under the staff conduct policy. Yes, sir, that is correct. Just not under the Title IX policy.
Not the Title IX, the federal Title IX.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Manning.
can I please ask that all board members or others mute their Zoom? I'm hearing somebody's phone vibrating or something on the desk. It's distracting. Not you. You're the chair, but whoever.
All right, thank you. All right, we'll now move to item 8.3, a report on the third 9 weeks discipline report. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, and to our viewing Richland 2 community, we'll have Mr. Cleveland Smith, who is our chief for pupil services, share the third quarter discipline report with you in a brief format. You have received this information ahead of time. The information that you receive is a little bit more extensive than what we will share this evening with the public. But we wanted to continue the tradition of sharing this information with you all and with the public for the purpose of being transparent in Richland 2. Mr. Smith.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. Chair.
Sorry, before you begin, let me check on Dr. Caution Parker. I just want to make sure I show you as a participant, but your video is not showing, so I'll just make sure we still have Dr. Caution Parker on the meeting. Okay, I'm gonna, Mr. Shad, I will put in a phone call to Dr. Kasha Parker and let me see if she's having some internet difficulties. But if it's okay with you, if you want to continue with the meeting or whatever you want to do. There she
is.
There,
Yes,
okay.
ma'am. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Sorry, just want to make sure I had all my board members here. I apologize for interrupting.
Okay, Mr. Smith, thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, board members, Dr. Davis. This evening, I will share with you an overview of the district report for the third quarter. Back at our February the 25th meeting, it was asked by the board for us to go ahead and share the data in regards to our discipline data in the 4-year format, and also to make sure that we share it cumulatively during this time. The screen that you see there is that information for the 4 years for the third quarter for 2016-2017 school year to this past school year 2019-2020. In this slide, there's the number of students with in-school suspensions from during the 2019-2020 school year. The number of students with in-school suspensions increased from 2018-2019 by 204 students. But if you look at that, you also see that in 2016, we had 1,412 students that had in-school suspensions, and during this past school year, we had 1,418. Our out-of-school suspensions decreased this year from 2,221, and last year it was higher at 2,244. But over the 4-year span, the out-of-school suspensions have increased by 411 students. Looking at the number of students who were expelled, this year that number decreased by 228 from 35 the year before, and that's the data there. Ms. Ruth, could you slide it up just a little bit? This information here is showing the same information, but this is showing it in percentage. Again, we see for 2019-2020 for in-school suspension, we did increase, and that increase was 0.7%. But when we look at the out-of-school suspensions, we see that we did for this school year go down by 0.1%. But if you look from 2016-17 to this school year, past year, 19-20, you see that we did increase over that period by 1.1%. The number of expulsions through the 4-year trend is 0.1%, so that remained constant during that time. This slide here illustrates elementary, level 1, level 2, level 3 offenses. Level 1 offenses for elementary schools during the 19-20 school year, the percent of level 1 offenses was 54.1%. And when we talk about level 1, that's where the highest 5 categories we had were inappropriate behavior, refusal to obey, disrespect, and disrupting class. Level 2 during that time was 42.8%, with hit, kick, and push, fighting, and major disruption being the highest level 2s that we had for elementary. And level 3 for elementary was 3.1% this school year. And that's examples of those who were bullying and weapons, as well as intimidation. A summary for elementary data, we see with the level 1, there has been a upward trend of increased level 1 offenses. However, there has been a significant decrease in the categories of level 1s for disrespect and also refusal to obey has gone down. With level 2, we have seen an increase in the hit, kick, and push. And for our level 3, there has been an increase in bullying from 2018 to 2019, and that increase was around 8 students that received that. And overall, we did have an increase in the number of out-of-school suspensions at our elementary level. Middle level, we have for the third quarter for this past year, level 1 offenses, they were 76.2%, and those range from disrupting class to inappropriate behavior to tardies to cutting class. Level 2 offenses were 22.1%, and those are hit, kick, and push, fighting, confrontation, and level 3 was 1.7%, and examples there are bullying, intimidation, drug possession. Looking at our middle school data summary, we see that inappropriate behavior has continuously trended down each since 2016. However, cutting class has increased, and it has a significant increase in that category. In our level 2 and level 3 offenses, level 2 infractions remain to be centered around conflict resolution. As I mentioned, hit, kick, and push, fighting, confrontation, those were the higher ones in that category. And our level 3 infractions during this 4-year period, it remained under 2%. You see that the highest was in 17-18 when it was 1.9%, but this school year it was 1.7%. When we look at our suspensions, 24% of the infractions are level 2, and 34% of those infractions, students receive out-of-school or in-school suspension during 1920. But there was an increase from the previous year. All right, high school data is here. We see that it's 91.4% for level 1, and the level 1, a lot of what you see for level 1 are the tardies, ID violation, and disrupting class. Level 2s were at 7.1%, and our level 3s were at 1.5%. The summary in regards to our high school discipline is downward with level 1 infractions. But again, we see that most of those are tardies and ID violation. Our level 2s were also were mainly detention hours that were not served, refusal to obey. And I'm pleased to say that our level 3 decreased overall in this area. And again, for suspensions, the third quarter this year, we were down in regard to suspensions. That is, that brings me to the conclusion of my report.
Thank you, Ms. Smith. Dr. Elkins?
Thank you so much for that report, because I really wanted to see that. So thank you for going back to do that. Just a question, I noticed that when we were talking about the elementary age students, we talked about the fact that the OSS, out of school suspension, has increased. Now, are we offering in-school suspensions or some type of other alternative to keep our elementary kids in school? I know that the middle and high school have in-school suspension rooms, but what are we offering in the elementary schools?
In elementary schools, we do have in-school suspension. It depends on what the infraction is, but you know, in our elementary school, every elementary school does not have an in-school suspension room, but we do have space for students that we have to go ahead and give in-school suspension to.
Now, when you say all of the schools do not have in-school suspensions, but we give in-school suspensions, how does that work? What does that look like if they don't actually house in-school suspensions at those schools? And then the other question is, how do we determine which elementary schools have in-school suspensions and which ones don't?
All right, I will have to get back with you for the exact schools that have in-school and the ones that do not. But when the way we address that is the student might be inside the main office or in the administrator's office or something, serving that in-school suspension instead of actually.
Okay, well, let me ask this. If they're in an administrative office serving their in-school suspension, then how would the administrator be able to perform their daily duties?
I'd like to jump in if I can. Thank you, Mr. Smith, and thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson, because I think you asking some really good questions. And so as you are formulating these questions, I'm writing down some thoughts right now. So one of the thoughts is, you know, what is the consistency of the elementary level ISS? And what infractions then determine whether or not an elementary student will receive ISS versus an out-of-school suspension? And another question is, why don't we have ISS or some form of alternative to OSS at every school? And so if every elementary school doesn't have an ISS or have not dedicated staff to ISS, one, is that something that we can begin to work on systematically across the district to ensure that we have the appropriate individuals to do that? Two, if we cannot, what's our alternative to out-of-school suspension that we can have those students to go through to demonstrate that they've gotten some sort of restorative practice or some sort of interaction with an adult, whether that's a school counselor or whether that's some form of it. So I think these are things that I've written down just from this report as well as from your questions that I think we need to take a hard look at and then I think bring back to you all, kind of either give to you in a board brief what we've decided to do as a district to address that issue. Because I believe I understand exactly the direction and the questions that you're asking is a level of consistency across the board and ensuring that we have the same services at all schools if we can.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other board members?
Mr. Chair?
Mrs. Agostini?
First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Smith, for the presentation. I really appreciate the historical data that you included in there, so it gives us a better reference. I have one question. Do we still have students waiting for hearings to appeal expulsions?
No, ma'am. At this time, for the past year, at this time we have held all hearings from the 1920 school year at this time, and for those that have appealed, we have presented it to the board.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Chair.
Mr. Manning?
Yeah, I also wanted to comment just for the public. We've talked about this previously, and Dr. Davis, I don't know if you want to elaborate, but our students who are expelled, we still offer a program for them that is offered to every student. So we continue to provide the opportunity for an education for them even once they're expelled. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's particularly offered at the high school level for pathways to promotion for those students who have been expelled. So every student at that level that's been expelled, we reach out to that family and that student and try to re-engage with them and provide them with wraparound services so that we can keep them on track for promotion. I think it's one of the reasons that you've seen over the last several years that we've seen some of our expulsion numbers go down in our school district. But I would be remiss if I did not also say that the expulsion numbers being decreased is also a commitment by the school board to really only look at those really hard at those offenses that are level 3 offenses. So it's not surprising that as you see the number of level 3 offenses go down in our district, you also see that our number of expulsions for that school year also has decreased. And that's an effort by the board to focus on those most egregious offenses and then allow those students to have additional opportunities to correct behavior by sending them back to school on probation or sending them to the alternative school for a period of time for some redirection as well as some wraparound services that we provide to them as well.
So at this point, it's fair to say.
We're still growing this program out year by year. I think we're just in year 2 of our pathways to promotion.
So at this point, it's fair to say that whether they have in-school suspension, out-of-school suspension, up to the point of even expulsion, we continue to provide education to students regardless of the disciplinary action.
We attempt to continue to provide education up through expulsions from school. We still try to keep the students connected, and so whether that's through a probationary period, or whether that's, and I think it's missed oftentimes because it's a lot of it is discussed in executive session, and then we come out in public session to talk a little, to give the results. But I do think the school board, Richland 2 School Board, should be commended for its continued efforts to ensure that students are receiving services. So whether our students, oftentimes when you hear the terminology receiving services, that's because the board has put in place that the student can be given an alternative or a second chance. They may have to go to LORADAC services. They may have to go to family intervention services that we help with. They may have to go to the alternative school. They go to different things, but the district has put in a myriad of steps before a student is typically expelled from school, and usually that is reserved for repeated high level 2 offenses or the egregious level 3 offenses. But I still think we have some work to do.
And we continue, I think the board has been dedicated as well as administration to continuing to improve on discipline, on all facets of discipline and continuing education. One of the other things, Dr. Davison, you've mentioned this before, is that we have to balance discipline and fairness in our districts with students and also for staff. And I know you monitor staff safety and feeling that they're safe and that there's a conducive learning environment balanced along with the fairness to students. Are you all still monitoring that? And if you are, is there a way that we can get something like that, some measure of that added to this report so that as we move in one direction, we make sure that we don't undermine the other component of that?
I think in our efforts to be more transparent, I would recommend that, and I'm recommending this publicly to Mr. Smith, and I'm giving Mr. Smith some directive that in the future when we present this data, we need to do some more demographic breakdown of this data as well as some more like type offenses. So we need to be able to show what the data truly looks like. It's very aggregate right now. We need to do a better job of disaggregating this data in our presentations to show, so that we can show that we're making a concerted effort in consistency and fairness as it relates to offenses and consequences for students. And so we will do that in our next disciplinary report. It will be a little bit more detailed with a more disaggregated report and from a demographic, gender, socioeconomic kind of a breakdown to give a better view from the elementary, middle, and high school level for our students, as well as to show that like offenses are receiving like consequences. This is a way that we can make sure that we're being consistent across the board, regardless of what the consequence, regardless of what the action may be.
And Dr. Davis, also I appreciate that definitely, but also add to it the component of safety in the classroom, that staff and that students continue to feel safe in the classroom. I know you all monitor that. If I'm being clear, that we don't go too far one direction, that our staff and students don't feel that it's safe or that there's a conducive learning environment. I want to make sure that we're monitoring that component as well.
Absolutely. I think our teachers need to continue and our students need to continue to feel safe. Well, our job is to be on the front end of this to make sure that we have programs and services in place to reduce the number of infractions or the incidents, I should say. And then how do we respond to the incidents? We are not asking and never will ask teachers to suppress any data or suppress any incident that will happen in the classroom. Actually, we want them to be we want them to give us an accurate recording of what takes place in the classroom. However, we want to make sure that they're appropriately trained to ensure that there is no prejudice, discrimination, bias, or anything like that is taking place. So I think it's several combinations of many things that go into creating a culture and environment that is conducive to having a premier academic experience in our schools. And that does begin with safety and security, as well as a world-class academic experience as well. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Yeah, if we can find a way to measure that in some way as you report back to us, like, I don't know what that would be.
I don't either.
Again,
I don't know if there's a measurement out there, but we can definitely give an update and report on how we're doing in those areas, for sure.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Manning. All right. Other board members? All right. Thank you, Dr. Davis and Mr. Smith again for this report. Now we'll move on to item 8.4, reopening schools discussion. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, to the members of the board, and of course to our viewing Richland 2 community. We have Dr. James Ann Sheely, who has spearheaded our reopening of schools task force. Dr. Sheely and her team has done a phenomenal job of collecting the data that has come in from various parents and faculty and staff members, as well as leading a well-capable, very diverse team in establishing the protocol or the phases of operation as we look to return back to school in the fall. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Sheely to share any updates or go through this reopening for our community. Once again, we did share this at the last board meeting. I believe it was on July 9th at a special call board meeting to give the board the information and the community information of what Richland 2 is looking to do. And then we will open it for the board for discussion. Dr. Sheely.
Mr. Shad, members of the board, Dr. Davis. Tonight I will share with you an update of the work of the Reopening Schools Task Force, which is divided into 6 sections. Define challenging goals, accelerate ed recommendations, DHEC assessment, survey data responses, draft reopening phases and recommendations, preparation for starting school. Our defined challenge is and has been, how will we logistically open schools in the fall in the safest manner to ensure the most equitable learning for all students? We have 3 goals that guide our work, which are as follows. The physical school environment should embody public health guidelines to prevent a COVID-19 outbreak and additional closures. In other words, we'll open in a safe and efficient manner. The plan must produce enough confidence that families, students, and educators feel comfortable and ready for learning in the fall. Communication with all stakeholders will be key. We'll utilize a diverse group of teachers, parents, guardians, principals, and various district-level personnel with expertise in the priority categories to ensure equitable solutions to meet all learners' unique needs. During our overview last week, I shared with you the Accelerate Ed recommendations that were proving to be the most challenging for us, and specifically pointed out the concerns regarding physical distancing. In my first presentation on June 30th, I shared with you visuals of what it would be like to physically distance in a classroom, on a bus, and in one of our high school auditoriums. Tonight, I thought it would be helpful to see a video of a typical day in our school buildings before the pandemic. Please keep in mind that class changes in a middle school or high school can take place up to 7 times per day. At these schools, our student populations are large and very few students attend classes with the same group of students all day long. Not only are we unable to physically distance, but the tracking of a student's COVID exposure to others would be nearly impossible. DHEC has developed metrics to categorize communities into low, medium, or high risk. Richland County is categorized as high in all 3 levels: incidence, trend, and percent positive. The ratings are updated every 2 weeks. Rating explanations can be found on our website as well as the DHEC website. When school starts back, we will be very deliberate in communicating where we are because the rating determines what phase we are in. On July 1st, we sent our parents, guardians, and students their second survey, and the faculty and staff survey was launched on July 6th. Both surveys closed Sunday, July 12th. Reminders were sent to both survey groups. On this slide, you'll see the response rates are significant: 22.76% for our students, 43.44% for elementary parents, 52.41% for our middle school and high school parents and guardians, and 54.38% for our staff. We can compare these participation rates to those of the calendar, which hover around 18% participation each year. It is important to note that the purpose of this survey was to gather input to help guide the work of the task force, not to choose a specific learning model for students. The survey results can be found on our Reopening Schools webpage. In this particular survey, the question that helped to guide our work was, how comfortable are you to return to school? Our results show that 45% of our students are either uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. 69% of our elementary parents are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. 70% of our parents of middle and high school students are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And 73% of our faculty and staff are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. On this next slide, you'll see that we have broken the results into categories. Here you'll note that our results indicate that 74% of our certified school level staff are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable returning to school, 71% of classified staff, 72% of district level staff, 74% of district level support staff, and 80% of our Richland 2 operations staff are uncomfortable or very uncomfortable returning to school. Again, the complete survey results are posted on our Reopening Schools page on our Richland District 2 website. Based on our extensive research and the guidelines provided by DHEC, Accelerate Ed, and our multiple surveys, the Richland District 2 Reopening Schools Task Force has created a draft plan that uses a 3-phase approach for reopening our schools. Phase 1, which is in red, is considered high level and would mean that we would return to school virtually. Phase 2, which is yellow, our medium level, we would transition over a 2-week period from phase 1 to phase 2 once the DHEC rating falls from high to medium. Phase 3 in green will be our low incidence level, which would be traditional, but continuing with the options for our families. Again, transitions between phases will occur over a 2-week period unless an emergency situation arises. Based on DHEC and Accelerate Ed guidelines, our recommendation for phase 1, when disease activity in our area is classified as high, students would attend school virtually. The district recognizes the challenges that arise in an all virtual environment when providing certain services required by IEP and 504 plans, as well as other specialized services such as instruction for English language learners. Providing certain specialized services may require some in-person individualized instruction at schools even during phase 1. Work continues on how to implement this part of our plan in a safe manner. There are 2 options for phase 1, our Richland 2 virtual program, now referred to as R2 eSchool program, or our e-learning at a student-zoned or assigned school. With us tonight is Dr. Emily Manigault, Director of Virtual School Programs, who will explain the R2 eSchool program.
Good evening. In the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, the idea of the eSchool developed due to the number of parents who reached out to the district explaining they would not allow their students to return to school for the 2020-21 school year under any conditions due to underlying medical conditions that made face-to-face instruction too risky. That stated, the target family for Richland 2's eSchool are those for whom the student or a member of the student's family has a medical concern which makes face-to-face instruction dangerous, not just in the short term, but also in the long term. Priority will be given to those families who fall into this category. As we continue the development of the program, we realize that there are also a lot of families who have students who thrived in the online learning environment and appreciated the flexibility of the virtual learning environment. Some of those students are already being served by our homebound services in the district or are being homeschooled by parents in our district. Richland 2's eSchool also wants to support those families provided space is available. On the next slide, you will see a few pieces of information that we think are important about Richland 2's eSchool. Students are still assigned to their zoned or assigned school, but transfer their attendance and their administrative oversight to Richland 2's eSchool program for the 2020-21 school year. Families must commit to Richland 2's eSchool for the duration of the 2020-21 school year, as we will transfer resources to support the program. Students will have a prescribed schedule with mandatory attendance expectations. This is important in order to ensure that teachers are responding to the individual needs of students and providing for interventions. Beyond the 2020-21 school year, students will have an opportunity to participate in competency-based learning. So a lot of the questions on the next slide that we've had over the last few weeks is, how is eSchool different than school-based e-learning? Well, there are a lot of similarities. Both are going to provide highly qualified instructors, and students will still be required to meet South Carolina Department of Education and Richland 2 curriculum standards and expectation. The major difference is that students must commit to Richland 2's eSchool program for the entire school year. Teachers will also have a similar commitment for the 2020-21 school year. During that time, if a student chooses to applies for and is accepted into Richland 2's eSchool program, they will not have an opportunity to move back into the face-to-face instruction. And that is why priority is given to families who do not plan to move back into the face-to-face instruction, at least during the 2020-21 school year. On the next slide, you will see a little bit of information about what a student's daily activity might look like in the program. Please note that these are proposed percentages of daily activity for students, and this will vary based on the individual needs of students. This is an approximation based on best practices for student learning. Embedded in each area of each of these pie charts will be interaction with teachers in a face-to-face environment, as well as work that students will do independently and work that will be done through guided practice. Thank you, Dr. Shealy.
Thank you, Dr. Manigault. Last spring, e-learning was an emergency deployment. This fall, our families can expect a structured learning model. Over the summer, we made a big step in improving e-learning by acquiring additional Chromebooks so that we can now provide a device to students kindergarten through 2nd grade. Here to share more about school-based e-learning is Ms. Nancy Gregory, Chief Academics Officer.
Thank you, Dr. Shealy. As Dr. Shealy said, in March, we had a rapid deployment with remote e-learning based on the closure of schools. In last week's overview, we shared how we have prepared for e-learning for 2021. There are 5 things to include: the organization, with the district has designed a framework for vision and system-wide organization for e-learning in Richland 2, to include e-learning expectations, a platform, best practices, and PD. The second thing, we focused on teacher resources to make sure our teachers have what they need to be successful, K-12 resources for teachers and content interventions along with training. These materials or resources are evidence-based and they're tied to our standards. The third is we've invested in our teachers in professional learning. The district has created a professional learning series to implement the e-learning framework for consistency across the district. The 3 minimally required modules are managing online learning, designing online learning, e-learning best practices. All teachers are participating in this PD during the summer or prior to the opening of school, with ongoing training and support from our technology learning coaches. Dr. Shealy also mentioned about additional devices for our younger students. That's number 4. And then number 5, we are working on providing parent e-learning resources. Those are being developed for additional support at the school level, along with parent universities, and at the district level with videos and recordings. You can expect that e-learning will be more focused on essential state standards and provided as both synchronous together as a class and asynchronous work completed by the student. And it will be much more structured, which what you're going to see with these schedules in just a few minutes. Schools will focus on necessary intervention and supports to ensure student learning and to address learning gaps. The schedule you have before you is a graphic. It is just a draft sample because, as we said, e-learning will look different in 2021. The structure will start with students logging in, and schools and teachers will have schedules. The takeaway from the schedule, which is really more of a middle school schedule, is that every class will meet. There will be interventions for students to help close learning gaps. Breaks will occur throughout the day, and there will be office hours. Again, the purpose of this graphic is to illustrate that e-learning will not look like e-learning in the spring. And again, our high schools will have bell schedules that are reflective of the high schools. On the next slide, this is just a sample or a graphic of what elementary e-learning might look like. And again, every class will meet. There will be breaks for students and even breaks within the classes, intervention, office hours. Again, you can expect e-learning to be much more focused and structured from the lessons we've learned from the spring. Dr. Shealy.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory. When we move to phase 2 or medium level, we will have 3 options for both grade bands. For elementary, our R2 e-school program, if students were accepted in the program before the start of school. We will continue with school-based e-learning or transition to the classroom communities model, which was developed by our Richland 2 design teams. For medium, phase 2 re-entry for our 6th through 12th grade students, the 3 choices are R2 e-school program, e-learning through schools, or AA Flex BB model. Before we talk about the in-person learning models of phase 2, let's touch on the safety precautions we will take when students return to the school building. We will adhere to DHEC and Accelerate Ed guidelines, which are as follows. We will require face coverings. We will maintain physical distancing. We will plan for cleaning and sanitizing frequently. We are in the process of making facility improvements, modifications for transportation and food service, implementing screening procedures, and following DHEC protocol with positive cases and contacts. We've received many questions about specific procedures regarding how we will ensure physical distancing, wearing of masks, handling arrival and dismissal, and other safety procedures. Each school is forming their own mini task force to develop school-specific procedures for making sure the safety precautions are followed. While the schools will receive district support and guidance on these procedures, schools' needs will vary depending on the layout of the buildings, schedules, and number of students returning to school. Because we received several questions regarding protocols for positive cases in the public participation forms, Ms. Dawn McAdams, our coordinator of health services, will now provide a brief overview.
Thank you, Dr. Shealy. I realize that there are many concerns about the health and safety surrounding reopening schools. So we're considering information from multiple sources: CDC, DHEC, Accelerate Ed, the American Academy of Pediatrics. We are looking at creating a well health room in every school where students can come in for daily medications, daily treatments, injuries, as well as a sick room or an isolation room where students can wait when they're waiting to be picked up. I'm working with district to decide what personal protective equipment we need for the district to support the classrooms as well as the health rooms. South Carolina DHEC provides exclusion criteria for students and staff in daycares and schools and information for us to follow on contact tracing. So as of right now, DHEC recommends we exclude students or staff if they have one of fever, shortness of breath, a new or worsening cough, or loss of taste or smell, or then 2 symptoms of sore throat, muscle or body aches, chills, fatigue, headache, congestion, and stomach symptoms. And once we send a student or a staff member home, they cannot return until they have either tested negative for COVID-19 or their physician determines that their health condition was related to something else. The sore throat and fever were actually related to the student having strep throat. So then we would follow DHEC criteria on when you can return to school or work with strep throat. Or they can complete isolation for COVID-19. So, quarantine for COVID-19. So they would, back to isolation. There's a difference between isolation and quarantine. If you're having symptoms, you isolate for 10 days from the onset of symptoms. And then in addition to the 10 days, you have to be fever-free for 24 hours and be improving in your overall symptomatology. So then we look at the same guidelines from DHEC if we have a case in a classroom. So this is where primary prevention is really the key, maintaining that 6 feet of social distancing, wearing the face covering, washing your hands frequently with soap and water, or using hand sanitizer with 60% alcohol. If there is a positive case within the classroom, then we have to look at that individual classroom. So we look at students or staff that were a close contact of the person. And a close contact means you were closer than 6 feet for more than 15 minutes at a time, whether you have a mask on or not. And those people would go into quarantine for 14 days after the student developed their symptoms. If social distancing was not maintained in that classroom, if kids were closer than 6 feet apart, the entire classroom and the teacher will need to quarantine for 14 days. If we think social distancing was reliably maintained, those kids were 6 feet apart, we are going to send the close contacts home for quarantine, and the remaining students and staff will be screened daily by the school nurse for 14 days for symptoms of COVID-19 and for fever. And we really are taking cleaning seriously. The classroom would then be cleaned and disinfected prior to students returning to the classroom. Fortunately, COVID-19 responds well to most cleaners, including soap and water. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McAdams. Ms. Gregory will walk us through a draft example of a classroom community schedule using AA Flex BB.
All right, this is a graphic just to show you what a classroom community might look like in the elementary school as we move to our next level or stage. You would have smaller numbers of students in the classroom, and as you can see here, it is similar to a traditional schedule. Students again would be have a reduced class size with safety and guidance. Home-based safety measures in the classroom with social distancing. And if you'll notice, because of the numbers of students and entering and exiting safely, we have a staggered entry and a staggered dismissal. But otherwise, it would look very similar to the traditional day. You will notice that in many cases, we would have push-ins to the classroom for things like ESOL, special ed, some of our other specialty classes. All right, Dr. Shealy, our next schedule is a little bit more complicated. This is the hybrid for middle school and high school. And the purpose of this graphic is to show you the big picture of the structure for the week with the hybrid AABB model. And it's to help families and also our teachers understand the structure. With this model, we can reduce the number of students in middle school and high school classrooms at one time. And so as a teacher, my students would be divided into two groups for social distancing, an A group and a B group. In the A group, they would meet face-to-face on Monday and Tuesday and have instruction with the teacher in the classroom. Wednesday, we have designed as a flex day for teachers and students to work together virtually. This would be a time for check-ins with students individually or in groups. For example, if I taught algebra, I might have my students meet together as a class or smaller groups to reteach something that day. And so again, there is a lot of flexibility to meet with students individually, groups of students, reteach, accelerate. But again, that is what the flex day is for. And also you will see where we can provide deep cleaning at the schools in the middle of the week before we switch. On Thursday and Friday, this group of students would work asynchronously at home, and that is independently on assignments or from the in-person instruction on Monday and Tuesday. And there are a variety of resources that students can use for intervention and acceleration or teacher-created lessons. And then students from group B would be just the opposite. On Monday and Tuesday, they would be working asynchronously. Wednesday, still a flex day. And then on Thursday and Friday, they would be attending classroom instruction. Again, this structure allows us to work with smaller groups of students at one time. Dr. Shealy.
Traditional learning, but will still offer the options of our R2E school program if a student was accepted in the program before the start of school, as well as e-learning for our families who are more comfortable with that learning model. I'm going to say that again because we've received several questions about e-learning, how long e-learning will be available. Our plan calls for offering e-learning all year long. In addition, families will have the option to switch from e-learning to in-person or in-person to e-learning during phase 2 and 3, based on what is most effective in meeting the students' and families' needs. Information regarding all learning models is on our website, and parents will have the opportunity to start making their choices via a selection form that will go out no later than July 27th. Parents, please, please, please complete this form as soon as possible once we send it out. Libby will call you to let you know it's on the way. In addition to making choices for each phase, you will have the opportunity to tell us about your ability to access from the internet from home. This information is very important so that we can work with the State Department of Education to help families with connectivity issues. Our phase 3 reopening plan has been described by one of our parents as addressing the need to educate our children while balancing the safety of staff, students, and family members. As we prepare for the first day of school, we will continue to use data for decision-making, planning, and implementation. We will continue to communicate in order to provide answers to our parents and guardians. At this time, we don't have answers to all the questions that were brought up during public participation and that we have received in numerous emails, such as questions about alert, or after-school programs, or after-school care during phases 2 and 3. However, I want to assure our students, employees, and parents that we are tracking all questions and are working tirelessly to finalize our plans so that we can answer those questions. One change to this slide from last week's presentation is the consideration to push back the start date of the school year. Dr. Davis will discuss our reasons for considering this a little later in the meeting. I also have some information to share about leap days and the USDA waiver connected to providing meals for students. The General Assembly has approved funding for 5 additional instructional days for students in grades 4K through 8th grade. These 5 days have been identified as learn, evaluate, analyze, and prepare. These days, called leap days, are mandatory for all districts. USDA waiver for meals. Board members, you received information in your board brief about this change so that our community will know. In March, when the pandemic started, the USDA provided waivers to states and school districts to allow all children to receive free meals regardless of status, to allow those to be given out to parents and not within a certain time frame. USDA has now rescinded some of those waivers and is requiring districts to go back to normal operating procedures for the upcoming school year. Those include that only students who qualify for free meals will receive a free meal. Students who do not qualify for free will either need to pay full price or reduced price for their meal. Additionally, students and families are no longer eligible to go get a meal from anywhere. They must go to their school, or if their school is not a meal site, the site assigned to them. The new guidelines will begin when the official school year starts. The district is working on communicating this message to families and encouraging them to fill out an application for free or reduced meals. The district is finalizing the meal plans for each phase of reopening schools. As one of the largest and most diverse school districts in the state, our goal has been to follow an informed, equitable, and considered process for reopening. We want nothing more than for our children to come back to school when it is safe for faculty, staff, and students. Our partners often ask how they can help us to get to phase 3. Our best suggestion is to follow the 3 W's. Wear your mask, wash your hands often, and wait. Keep your physical distance. Mr. Shad and members of the board, it is important that you know that our application for reopening schools has been submitted to the South Carolina Department of Education on time. My colleagues and I are happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Davis and Dr. Shealy. Board members?
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Manning, and then Ms. Mackey.
Yeah, if we can elaborate a little bit more on the process from the State Department of Education for approval. I have a lot of questions around when the plan goes out of draft, and that would be upon approval, I'm assuming, from the State Department of Ed, and what we expect that timeline to look like. Can y'all elaborate a little bit on that for the public?
Yes, sir. This is what we know now. We found out about the application process Friday a week ago, and it was due this past Friday. It's our understanding that there should be about a 2-week turnaround. We're hoping for less, but about 2 weeks is what we've been told for approval.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Manning. Mrs. Mackey, and then Dr. Elkins.
Thank you, Mr. Shad. A couple of questions, and I'll try to ask questions in advance if I can, but one of them I wasn't sure about, and I've gotten a few questions from parents, is about with regard to attendance. Of course, attendance will depend on the model we employ to go back to school and at what time. But will there be leniency requirements? Will there be some leniency granted with regard to attendance, or would it be adhered to as normal? Because of course, you know, there may be kids who have to go home for a while, or parents who are skittish about drinking them, but how about bringing their kids? But I've gotten some questions with regard to how attendance will be monitored or adhered to, or if at all. That's my first question.
Ms. Mackey, let us follow up on that. I'm not totally sure, so we're still working through that. So if you'll give us an opportunity to work through that a little bit.
Not a problem.
I can touch a little bit on that. The expectation from in my conversations will be that we will take attendance. And so if we're in an e-learning model, for example, that teacher is meeting with their students each day for the entire day. And so they will take attendance like any other day of school. They're just going to be meeting through through technology. If they're in virtual school, then there's really no necessarily attendance regulations through the virtual school. So if they are familiar with Richland 2 virtual or SC virtual, they are working on assignments and a competency base. But our program will have more of a face-to-face component. But the seat time requirement is a little bit different in the virtual and when you're in a virtual school program. When we go to the face-to-face, when we're in phase 2 or phase 3 and we're in a face-to-face model, when students assign or arrive to school, we will take attendance under normal circumstances. The question that I've gotten, Ms. Mackey, I don't know if this is what the parent was asking, was what if a student gets sick and then their attendance is they jeopardize their attendance due to being sick as a result of that. Well, we will then be able to make accommodations and have some flexibility when it comes to student attendance. Just like the same thing for employees. There's some questions about employees and what do they do with their sick leave if they have some protection under some of the federal guidelines that relates to their attendance at work as a result of COVID. And so we would document that attendance of that student being sick of COVID and recognize that they may be in quarantine beyond the number of days that they could legally miss from school. And so with the appropriate documentation, we would be able to mitigate that issue or concern for parents to ensure that that student is not penalized for their attendance. However, I will follow. That was my initial conversation with in the state superintendent's meeting, but we will get more clarification on that to be able to be more explicit in our explanation of what attendance and what protocols will be taken due to a student's lack of attendance because they are sick from COVID.
No, that's very helpful. That's very helpful. Thank you, Dr. Davis. My other question, and then I'll have a comment. With regard to my understanding of the middle school and high school schedule, it looks like it would be the same schedule for both. And I'm not sure who could answer this, but are they both going to be taking skinnies or no block, or what? How would that work if they're both on the same schedule for middle school and high school with regard to skinnies and block scheduling and skinnies?
Ms. Becky, we're working on that right now, working with schools to develop those schedules. That was just a sample, as I mentioned, to point we would have schedules and the things that would be contained in that, but we're working with schools on that to more reflect the regular school day.
Perfect. Thank you. And just a comment, Mr. Chair, if I would, I just want to thank all the folks who presented tonight. There are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of variables. Everyone's situations are unique with regard to their families, their kids and teachers. And at the end of the day, we're trying to keep folks safe. But I just want to thank Dr. Davis, Dr. Shealy, and all of the moving parts and all of the people who are working to compile these reports for us. I mean, we're probably ahead of the game than many other school districts, and we're all pretty much in a quagmire with regard to the state superintendent, the governor, and president mandating things. But I just want to thank y'all for the information you're providing for us. I know that it's fluid at times. I know it's labor intensive, but thank you for working so hard to be transparent and to keep us abreast of information as best you can. I appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Maggie. Dr. Elkins, and then Dr. Holmes.
Just a few questions, and they all came from teachers. One question is, if a teacher needs time off, how are we going to accommodate the students with subs or sub plans to carry on that teacher's duty if they're requesting time off? That's the first question. The second question, I think Dr. Davis addressed part of it with attendance. I had questions about if someone was ill a little longer than the time that we had expected, how would we curve those days? So I think you kind of addressed that. And then the third question is, when you guys shared the draft with us, wanted to know how would the RTI work with the elementary age kids?
Thank you, Dr. Elkins. Ms. Williams will answer the attendance question regarding time off, and Dr. Sean Suber will answer the RTI question.
Thank you, Dr. Shealy. As a response to substitutes and time off, if a teacher needs time off, they would be eligible for time off based on using their current leave. And for substitutes, we are we'll be training substitutes on e-learning. So they will get the proper training from academics on e-learning. So we should have enough substitutes to be able to cover the class should a teacher be absent.
Okay, would you put that information out on the website? Because we've had questions about substitute training, and I think that would be great that if someone was applying to become a substitute, they already know that they will have to go through that type of training. So that's something we can post on our website, Dr. Davis, once we decide on which plan we're going to go with.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins Johnson. And yes, and Ms. Williams, I would like for you though to clarify. I think Dr. Elkins Johnson's question is a little bit more specific in just if they're requesting time off, but specifically if they are also beyond the time they need based on being diagnosed with COVID. What are their protections as a result of being sick or diagnosed with COVID, and they need to request time off as a result of that?
Absolutely. So there is a family first FMLA that is implemented. So you do receive 2 weeks of pay, which is 2 weeks of pay that is not docked against your personal sick leave. Should you have to go beyond that leave, then you would qualify for FMLA and then be charged your leave, have to use your leave time after those 2 weeks are exhausted.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. That's awesome. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. And unfortunately, speaking from experience, more than likely, if they contract COVID, they're probably going to exhaust 2 weeks. They more than likely will exhaust 2 weeks. Not everyone, but there will be several that probably will, and at least enough to have the strength to come back to teach a class.
And Dr. Sieber will answer the RTI question.
Yes, ma'am. RTI will still be provided through the e-learning platform. We purchased Edgenuity last year with MyPath and PathBlazer, which targets specific skills of our students. So we'll be able to provide intervention during the e-learning platform as well as when we go to the AABB format at elementary and middle school. We also have it embedded into our high school schedule as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Super. Thank you, Ms. McGuire.
Thank you. Dr. Holmes and Mrs. Agostini.
First of all, let me say thank you, Dr. Shealy, Dr. Davis, and all the teachers and the faculty staff that worked on the plan. It is so extensive, and we are so leaps and bounds from other districts that I've heard of. And thank you for your hard work. And most of my questions were really answered. And I thank you, Dr. Davis, because I did have a concern about the teachers needing more time, but you just really addressed my question. So thank you. So I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Agostini, and then Dr. Elkins, I'll come back to you. Ms. Agostini, you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. So we are still looking at special ed and IEP. And if we were to start in phase 1, we haven't ruled out bringing those students back in. Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. And I've got a few more questions. The classroom communities, is that 5 days a week for the kids?
That is 5 days a week.
Okay. Do we have a school nurse in every school?
Ms. McAdams will answer that for you.
Yes, ma'am. At this time, we are fully staffed for the first time in many years. However, I will preface it that there are several nurses with underlying health conditions that may be out on FMLA. So I'm working to ensure that I may have sub-nurses that may be able to help fill in.
And thank you.
And I think, Ms. Agostini, just to jump in addition to that, not only do we have several nurses, but we have in some schools nurses and the nurses' aide that may qualify to be out due to underlying health conditions as a result of returning back to school. So we will have to do some shifting. I believe at this point we're looking at about 7 throughout the district that may qualify for that.
Okay. And then, and I want to thank everybody for the presentation. You all have done a phenomenal job. I'm a little overwhelmed because that was a lot of very thorough information. So I'm glad it's on the website. My last question is, people, keep sending emails trying to, share with the board their thoughts. And I so appreciate that. But is the board voting on this, or who makes the decision ultimately?
To go back, I'll address that, and to go back to initial question that you asked as far as about special education students and students with IEPs, we are currently exploring how we will be able to do that within the phases. However, under close, thorough evaluation and conversations with with our chief for instructional support services, our most medically fragile students put us in a bit of a conundrum or a quagmire, because those students are students who have severe underlying conditions. And so in some cases, so do their teachers. And so by bringing them, they require very close contact in order to provide them with the essential services that they need. So we're gonna have to try to figure out how do we do that and minimize the possibility of infection, one infecting the other, the student or the teacher, because it's going to be difficult for the teacher to do her job if she can't touch the student or help the student, particularly when it comes to some of the physical therapy side of the things that they may do when working with those students. And so that puts us in a bit of a challenge there. As far as it relates to who makes the decision, it is my understanding and my perspective that this falls under administration and operation. This is not something that requires the board to vote on. And there are a few policies that support that. But in general, even when speaking to School Board Association and their attorney, the opinion was given to us that it is indeed a administrative and operational decision. Our responsibility, of course, as administration, is to keep our board thoroughly abreast of the decisions that we're making as it relates to administration and operation. And I also confer with several of my colleagues around the Midlands and who are all proceeding and progressing in the same manner. We will, however, if we have to change the calendar, which we will be discussing after this conversation, that will require the board's vote to push our calendar, our start date back, if that is so the decision of the board. But that is not a voting item for this evening as well.
So we're still pretty fluid, and there's nothing set in stone yet. We're still.
Yeah, we're pretty confident. This is the plan that we submitted to the State Department of Education, and so just to kind of give you an example how cumbersome this may be, Ms. Agostini, let's say the board voted on this plan. If we had to make any changes to this plan, we would then have to call the board back to a meeting to approve the change to the plan. If anything else then should happen 2 or 3 days later, because this is a very fluid situation, because if it required a board vote, then we would have to call the board back in to change the plan. And we could be doing that back and forth throughout this entire process. So this is, because this falls in an administrative and operational purview, it gives us the flexibility and the fluidness to be able to transition as we need. So for example, if you voted on this plan today and then the the State Department of Education says, no, we don't accept your plan, we have to then adjust that plan, bring that plan back to you for then you to approve that plan again, to then resubmit that plan to the school board, to the State Board of Education. That's a lot of moving parts to be able to do that, and creates more of confusion and I think just more confusion in general, and doesn't allow us to progress through this process.
And I'm sorry, I think you misunderstood my point. My takeaway and my comment on that was nothing has been decided tonight, that we don't know. The board, the administration hasn't decided when we're going to start school or what phase we'll start in. So my intent of my comment was so parents don't go home and make, their decision this evening. It's still
right. They will be receiving a email for them to make a decision based on the 3-phase and which option they would like in phase 1. Unless things change as it relates to DHEC's recommendations, or the spread of infection is reduced from high to moderate, this is the plan that we are moving forward with as a school district, to start in either e-learning option or with Richland 2 virtual, with the virtual option for our community. So we will be sending that information out for them. And this is the plan that we submitted to the State Department of Education. And one of the requirements that Ms. Spearman asked us to have was to make sure that we had in our plan an opportunity or somewhere in the plan for a 5-day face-to-face option. And so we made sure that we had that 5-day face-to-face option in the plan, but that comes in phase 3. So I guess the short answer to that is yes. This is the recommendation that we're sending. This is our plan we're sending to the State Department. And if this plan is adopted and accepted by the State Department of Education, we will then execute this plan. It will then change if the spread of infection is reduced and we move from high to moderate, or we move from high to low.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins.
Yes, I forgot. I have a few more questions. The first question is, does CFA, CFI, and CFK have nurses? And if they do not, what are the medical plans that we have for those schools? So the first question is, do they have nurses? And then the second part of that is, if they do not, tell me which schools do not have a nurse, and then what are the medical plans we have in place?
Currently, the centers, CFK, Maine, North, CFI, and CFA are covered by the nurse at the adjoining middle school. So there has always been a nurse for that school. They do not have a separate nurse. Neither does Adult Ed, Charter, R2I2, or Blythewood Academy. But we have a nurse available to be there to give guidance, to respond to emergencies, to do contact tracing and that kind of stuff.
So what's the medical plan that we have in place since there's not a nurse on site?
Each child that needs an individualized health care plan, that is developed by the nurse at the middle school campus. That I guess I'm not clear exactly what you're asking.
I'm asking,
there's a nurse available to go over to assist with medication administration, assist with ill or injured students. Now, when the State Department of Education requested how many school buildings in the state do not have a full-time school nurse, I did reply that we do not have an independent full-time nurse at the centers, Blythewood Academy, Charter, and R2I2. In the state, there's 75 part-time nurses and 129 schools with no nurse. Those schools I just mentioned were included in that 129. So South Carolina needs 204 school nurses to be fully staffed during a pandemic when hospitals are recruiting nurses and hospitals pay much more than what our district is able to pay. Unfortunately, that's why I consistently lose nurses, is our pay scale.
Okay, thank you. And then my next question, I think Nancy would probably be able to answer this, or Dr. Davis, if one of you guys can answer this. I know high schools are totally different with their intervention programs. Can you tell me what is some of the feedback from the high school principals on the intervention plan? And maybe Nancy can answer this. On the intervention plan, what's some of the feedback you received from the high school principals on the intervention plan? Because I know on Wednesdays was that day that kids actually started late. So what's the plan for intervention for the high school students? Their schedule.
Nancy, would you like to answer?
Yes, I'll be happy to answer, and Dr. Suber can chime in. But we purchased resources that we will be using with them, and what we are planning on is embedding it so that there is intervention time each day during their daily schedule. And they would be using the program that we talked about that is evidence-based. It is tied to the standards. It can be used for interventions, but it can also be used for content, for acceleration.
So did the principals provide input on how they think they would like to use it at their particular school? Because I know all the schools are totally different.
We have actually been looking at something more systematic across the district so that we have consistency. Because one thing that one of the many things we included on the reopening of schools plans was that we would be providing interventions, because one of the questions is about closing learning gaps. And we have some students that had a good experience with e-learning. Some may not have had as good of an experience. And some students may not have been engaged at all, and they will all be within the same classroom. So it is more important than ever that we have interventions on a regular basis in the schedule at elementary, middle, and high. And it is also a requirement of MTSS, which is mandated by the state, which Dr. Suber could elaborate on if there are questions there.
No, I don't have any questions there. Just concerned about the high school, their intervention, as well as that Wednesday late start. How will we accommodate the students with that?
Dr. Douglas Johnson, we will not. I don't believe we will have, unfortunately, a Wednesday late start this year. Yeah, because we want to try to maximize instructional time. But the Wednesday days for some of those students, of course, will be an asynchronous day where they will be working independently and also on some of their assignments that were given on Monday and Tuesday. And then also for those students who come on Thursday and Friday, they will also be using that Wednesday as an asynchronous day, as well as intervention opportunities for them to be working on assignments, touching bases with their teachers before they report to school on Thursday and Friday.
Okay. And one more thing, Dr. Davis, since you mentioned that, will there be like morning or evening tutoring for high school? I'm just curious because I know we're still trying to do this school like normal school days. So will we still provide that? Because I think that's what parents and students may want to know too.
I believe that can be addressed at the school site, but we can have conversations about how they were going to provide additional support after normal school hours. We're hoping that Wednesday day will allow them to contact with the teacher, but absolutely, I would imagine that we would be able to put something in place to ensure that our kids are at the middle school as well. And we do have some of that at the elementary school. If you look at that schedule with the check-in and kind of check out at the very end of the day, but at the high school level and middle school level to provide some sort of tutorial option. And we'll look into that as an addition to our offering.
Okay, thank you. And you guys did an awesome job on this presentation, Dr. Shealy and your team. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Elkins. Any other board members? All right, I have a few questions. Ms. Gregory, well, first of all, Dr. Manigault did an excellent job with regard to the R2E school. But it sparked a question for Ms. Gregory with the e-learning model. Can you give us any idea of how much of a percentage will be parent assisted, and specifically for our middle school kids, especially our sixth graders?
Mr. Shad, we are working with principal reps and principals on expectations now, but we will be using something very similar along the lines of the pie charts that Dr. Manigault shared with you. But we will be adjusting those and getting input from our principal reps.
Okay, and thank you. And with regard to those parents, as I recall, I believe that the district is providing or will be soon providing information to the parents, something similar to Parent University, so that they can know how to properly assist their students at home if we are in phase one, and most likely will be in phase one. Is that correct? That's already been given out? Because I know we have PD that was provided to teachers. But
Chuck Holland and his team are working on that. They're creating a website that we will link to our website with videos and different supports for parents to help them. In addition, at each school, the technology learning coach will be sponsoring or working through parent universities to help our parents, because we know that's an important component, that not only are we helping our students, but our families, our parents too, in providing the support they need.
Absolutely. And just to do a comment off of that, in terms of the social and emotional well-being of our students, I know that we have that built in actually in the schedule, which I appreciate that on the elementary level. But my hope is that we would have those counselors that would ordinarily in the traditional schools be available for students who may be going through some things, but that the counselors, Dr. Davis, would also not only be available, but would actively be trying to seek out these students, most likely us being in phase one, having that kind of contact, not just with the teachers and the students, but that the counselors will be available to try to assist that. And frankly, with the outreach that we have from a district level to our parents, making sure that we're able to, stay engaged with them, because it's going to be a time that we're going through with reopening of schools.
Yes, sir. We're planning to launch a very robust engagement plan, and making sure we contact and stay in contact with our students while we are in phase one. in phase 2, particularly those students who are participating in e-learning or in some sort of virtual format with us. And so we are planning to utilize, we've had some preliminary discussions in our senior leadership meetings discussing how we would be able to roll that out and to what expectations, to what depth. But preliminarily, what we're looking at is being able to use as many of our personnel who would traditionally be helping through the running of the school day to have them participate in our outreach efforts. And so those outreach efforts, we looked at multiple options. One, of course, would be basically face-to-face visits, an opportunity to go to our students' home, knock on a door and do wellness checks, to make phone calls. We were talking about taking school buses on routes and parking at all of our bus routes, having those individuals, parents sign up and just kind of, if they need a new Chromebook or a new cord, whatever supplies, and provide that, make contacts through doing that, and then ask questions like, how are you doing? Are you connecting well on e-learning? What's your challenges and things like that? Really trying to beef up the social emotional wellness of our students so that we can, and also at the same time, simultaneously ensuring that we're staying connected. And we plan to do this periodically throughout the time periods that we are not in a 5-day face-to-face brick and mortar classroom setting.
Okay, thank you. And now let's stay with the e-learning schedule for elementary. That is, and I saw the schedule, but that is going to be what a full day looks like. And I know it's still fluid, Ms. Gregory, but that's what it's going to be like on a full day. Of course, we have some parents that work. So are we allowing for flexibility with regard to, students making sure that they are engaged and with the teacher, because of course their parents are maybe there, or their parents may have to work, and I'm not quite sure what kind of decisions they're making at this time. But will there be flexibility with regard to completion of work in an ideal, quote unquote, ideal day for an elementary student and their family?
Mr. Shad, we're still working on those expectations with principals, but we will work with families. We always work with families, and as Dr. Davis shared before, it is going to be more structured in e-learning, where we are taking attendance, students are logging in, they are checking in, but we always work with our families.
And then, of course, we have a special group. And Dr. Davis, I'm not sure if you're prepared to answer this, but we have teachers who are parents. So what are we doing for those teachers who we are hoping will be there to teach their class of 25 or so students, but their babies also need to be educated? What are we doing?
Well, right now, we're not, our teachers will have the option, as long as we're in an e-learning model, to either come to their school to teach their e-learning class from their classrooms. And we're hoping that our teachers actually exercise that option. And I know that we'll have several teachers who would prefer to come to their school and work from their classroom. But if the teacher cannot do that because of childcare issues, and of course they will still be permitted to teach the e-learning class from their home. We've had some debate or discussion about, should we allow those students to come to school with their parents, but that creates other issues as well. And so we didn't want to create an issue where we have multiple students in a building and we're saying that the building's not open for students to be in the classrooms in a brick and mortar setting. And so that's why it's an option for our teachers to report to school, to teach from their classrooms or to teach from home, and all may not feel comfortable at that level. Our hope and I know hope is not a strategy, but our hope is that we will begin to process of easing the level of comfort as we get closer and closer to switching from one phase to the next. We get more comfortable with being in a shared space again, but not to necessarily just abandon all precautions and plot everyone back into those spaces. So we do recognize that could be a challenge for our teachers, and we are trying to work. Work through those challenges.
Okay, thank you. And now to the health side, Dr. Davis and Ms. McAdams. I tried to follow Ms. McAdams as closely as possible with regard to protocol. If there is a positive test, for example, with a student,
Okay.
if the student exhibits symptoms, and we know the way this virus is, some can be asymptomatic but still contagious. If a student though presents at the school, and my understanding is that then we would look to see if there are students who and staff who were in close contact, which means less than 6 feet and at least 15 minutes. And we may have classes that are like, and this of course is in phase 2 with our hybrid. Then we look at those students. My question is, are those students who transition to other classes who may be asymptomatic, but have obviously been exposing to other kids who are in, and staff who have been in, for example, they're in math class, but then they go to ELA, and now are we looking at those ELA students, or are we only isolating it to that particular class and then just see where those students are who may be in isolation or in quarantine? And before you answer that, the next part would be, do we know it? DHEC, I know, is doing the contact tracing. If they find that there is an adult in a household who had tested positive, are they required to let the schools know that the students who also live in that home potentially could be exposing the students? Or are we not allowed to get that information because, of course, that adult has their privacy rights?
Correct. DHEC does not notify us if there is a student in a household of a positive contact.
Okay.
And back to your original question about, if a student presents with symptoms, one of the first 4, they automatically have to go home. And then there's a second grouping that they have to have 2 of those symptoms. So in the elementary school, it's not as difficult because those students are in their one community all day long. Those kids stay together all day. When you get to middle and high school, to be quite honest, it's going to be very daunting. I don't sleep at night thinking about how we are going to contact trace at Spring Valley High School, at Blythewood High School, at Dent Middle School. I'm working with different companies that are offering different kinds of software to assist with that. But to answer your question, we'd have to look at that student's first period class and determine who was closer than 6 feet for greater than 15 minutes. Look at second period, third. Do they have blocks? Do they have skinnies? Are they there for 7 periods? Or they're there for 4 blocks? Do they ride the bus home? Do they go to daycare? Do they stay for an afternoon activity? So we are accustomed as school nurses to doing this on a smaller scale for something like pertussis, and we do minimal contact tracing with regular flu. And even during the height of the H1N1 swine flu pandemic, which I was in this position then, so I've lived through, this is my second pandemic now, but that wasn't nearly as severe as what we're facing now.
Okay.
Did I answer all your questions?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Dr. Davis and maybe Dr. Shealy, with regard to the meals, my understanding is that it's going to now go back to just free and reduced meals in terms of our meal distribution. If folks can't afford to pay, then they will pay. So we are no longer, even in the e-learning model or with phase 2, going to be providing meals, no questions asked. We're just distributing that. Is that correct?
That's correct. That guideline or waiver has been rescinded. And so we are encouraging those families who think they may qualify for free or reduced lunch to please complete the form so that they can be properly identified. We are, I think, if I'm not mistaken, we have some latitude up to October where they're still qualified from, where they still are qualified from last year. But we need to make sure that they get those free and reduced lunch forms if they feel they qualify completed. Now, those individuals who we will still be working to deliver to make sure that the students are getting meals. We just won't be able to just give meals to any student. between under the age of 18 without being qualified. Give it to them for free without them qualifying for free, or give it to them at a reduced rate without them qualifying for a reduced rate meal.
Okay, and then our hotspots, mobile hotspots, that technology, we're on board with all of that. I know we did a very good job in the spring, but of course now we know we have some history, so we can plan better for the fall. But the mobile hotspots, those are going to be in place as well.
Yes, sir. We're still working. Of course, we're asking for parents to identify for us if they need or have connectivity issues so that we can address those issues prior to the start of school. And so we are working to do that. I do have Tom Cramner. I don't know if Tom wants to expound on that a little bit more and where we are with the mobile hotspots. Tom?
Yes, we currently have about 237 households now that have hotspots in their house, which can also include multiple students that are in the household. We have additional 300 mobile hotspots that are available now for us. When the parent sign-up instrument is going out in the next few days, we'll know precisely who needs one. So as those parents request a mobile hotspot, we will have those mobile hotspots available to them. So the goal is every student who needs access will have access. That's our goal, and so that's where we're heading with this. And we're going to make adjustments as needed to make sure that every student in e-learning will have access.
Okay, thank you. And lastly, Dr. Davis, you did, and Dr. Shealy stated that we submitted our plan, our final draft plan on time to the Department of Education. When do we expect to hear back from them? Especially since parents.
Dr. Shealy shared that we think it's probably going to be a two-week turnaround is what she was told when she submitted the plan. I think she wanted to also emphasize that it was reported on one of the local stations that we had requested an extension. And so Dr. Shealy, of course, and the task force take great pride, as they should, in getting that plan submitted on time. We initially asked for extension just in case we needed one, but we were able to submit that plan on time on Friday to the State Department of Education. So I think she wanted to mention that.
So as I understand it, the parents, we'll send it out to the parents on the 27th without knowing whether it's going to be approved by the state, because they have a 2-week window.
Yeah.
And so parents are making this decision on whether they're going to do e-learning or virtual without having gotten guidance yet from the State Department, if they don't respond by the 27th.
Right. They may respond earlier, but we feel confident our plan will be approved with maybe some minor tweaks here and there. But we don't want to wait too long to get the plan, get the data from our parents about and what options they would like, so that we can have an appropriate time to plan and put things in place to ensure a successful start of school.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you all so much, and thanks to Dr. Shealy and the rest of the task force. Thank you, board members, for a great discussion on this.
And Mr. Shad,
yes, sir, Dr. Davis.
Before we move to the next agenda item, I just want to take an opportunity to shout out one of our parents. I'm not going to necessarily, I think he's still watching, but I'm not going to put him on, say his name, just for privacy purposes. But appreciate you sending an email to the board, and that information was shared to me. And I want to say that I made the statement that when dealing with our special education students, particularly our most medical fragile students, that it can kind of put us in a quagmire. And I did not intend to state that was an awkwardness for us. And so I appreciate you sharing that with me, and recognize that indeed you are the parent of an awesome student. And that is, and the quagmire terminology word may not have been the appropriate word. And so I recognize that, and just to let you know that we value you and your student, and all of our students in Richland too, and would not qualify or classify any of our students as being awkward. So thank you for the courage to reaching out to us in a very respectful and professional manner to share your opinion and your thoughts about that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. All right, and now we'll move to item 8.5, an update on the 2021 school year calendar. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And the members of the board, and to our community that is watching. I did have a chance to peep out there. I think I saw 1.3K views as of the time that I looked. So we can probably say this is probably our most attended board meeting ever. But we do have some recommendations for the calendar that we would like to share with you all. And we want to talk about pushing back the possibility of pushing back the start date of our school year. And so we have composed some reasons for pushing back the start of the school year. The first reason it will give us an opportunity to implement our leap days. We are prepared to implement our leap days as is, but it does give us an opportunity to spread some of those leap days out so that we don't have to use them 5 consecutive days in a row. And so as you remember, the leap days that Dr. Shealy shared with us is about learning, evaluating, analyzing, and preparing for the start of school. And we're required to do 5 leap days, and those days require us to have some face-to-face opportunities for our students to come in for the purpose of learning, evaluating, analyzing, and preparing. Scheduling and planning that's taking place take place after parents select learning models. Options for the phase that gives us an opportunity to schedule and prepare for that after we get that information in. Time to practice implementations of the logistics and details, and especially the safety procedures. So it gives us a time to run through the logistics of how we would operate in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Guidance from the state and federal officials change frequently. And so, for example, submitting a plan to the State Department of Education for approval was announced on July 10th, and then it was due on July 17th. So being able to push the start date back, as you stated just a few minutes ago, Mr. Shad, it gives us an opportunity to give our parents some time to think critically about the decision that they're gonna make, and then it also gives us a little bit more time to analyze that data and make the necessary adjustments to our schedule. We have some possible dates that we reviewed as an administration as our start date: August the 31st, September the 2nd, and of course, as mentioned by the governor of South Carolina, September the 8th. When we are looking at our calendar, we have a lot of input and feedback, and I would say I think we do a fantastic job as a school district of getting a lot of people involved in the calendar. However, we don't have a lot of time to do those things. So what we've done is we have reached out to, of course, various members of our task force, as well as Tracy Footman, who is one of our principals, but also will be serving as one of our executive directors for leadership at the elementary level, and a member of our task force, has shared options with classroom sections, cross sections of teachers and parents, and support staff and employees for their input. So we did make it and still take an opportunity to reach out to a cross section of individuals to get some input. And I personally have emailed a few teachers just to get some input from them as well on if this would be amenable or something that it would be, I should say, be beneficial for them if we had an opportunity to push the start date back just a little bit. So our recommendations would be to hold a special call board meeting next week for the board to take actions on a recommended calendar. And based on the review of various options, the calendar and feedback, we recommend pushing the start date back to August 31st. And our last day of school would then be June the 11th. So if we went back past the 8th, as suggested by the governor, it puts us probably in the middle of June, and we don't know what the start date of school next year would be. And so we want to make sure, well, we did approve a 2-year calendar, but we want to make sure that we give ourselves, we're not going too far into the summer. So August 31st is our recommended start date. None of these options are ideal, but we believe that the recommendation that we would like to bring forward provides additional time we need for planning and implementation. It enables us to have 3 days still have 3 days at Thanksgiving. While winter break would be a little shorter, this option only takes 2 days away from winter break compared to the other options that we may present that will reduce it by 3 days. So has the least impact on our winter break. It doesn't impact our Thanksgiving. It limits the long stretch of weeks in school without a day off. So we still would not have these, eliminates these long stretches where we wouldn't have any time off, and we will still need that. And it enables the end of school during this second week of June, on June 11th, just 1 week later than what our current calendar provides.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Dr. Holmes and then Dr. Elkins. Dr. Holmes?
I didn't have anything, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I saw the finger. I'm sorry. Dr. Elkins?
Yes. With all due respect, do we need a special call meeting next week? We've had 2 board meetings this month, and the next meeting is August 4th. Can this not hold off to August 4th? I can't speak for everyone else, but we need time too. We've been working just like you guys, and I know the cabinet needs time, but I'm just one person. But we've had a lot of special call meetings, and I know we're in a different time, but even with that different time, some of these requests can be delayed until the next meeting. So is it that urgent that we need to call a special call meeting, or is this something we can hold off until August 4th?
Dr. Elkins, I believe our next board meeting is August 11th. And I think the administration wants to be able to hear from us in terms of the calendar change before that. So we don't actually have a regularly scheduled board meeting on August 4th, but and I'll listen to what the other board members want to say about it as well. But my understanding is that we're only talking about this one item for a special call board meeting for next week, I'm sorry. So in theory, that would take maybe 10 minutes, if that, or 15 minutes at the most, if that.
I understand that, but we have a long-winded board, and what we consider that may be taking 30 minutes or 20 minutes will be another 2 or 3 hours. And I do want us to be mindful. I don't have a problem with these meetings, but I want us to be mindful that we have allocated a certain amount of meetings that we will have. And I do understand that this is a different time, but I also want you guys to be mindful of our time as well.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Elkins Johnson, August 11th would be the next regular scheduled board meeting. So if it didn't pass, then we would have 1 week essentially to roughly before school would start. And so that's why we're asking for the special call board meeting on next week so that we have the appropriate amount of time to plan. But I definitely understand and appreciate your position on that, because we have been asking a lot and you all are working as well and have been fielding calls and emails just as much as we have. And we do appreciate y'all's support on that. Within all of my power, I will not try to put anything else on this agenda except.
Okay, as long as we don't add anything else to this.
Yeah, except the approval of the calendar, and we will present you all with those optional calendars ahead of time for you to review them. And then, and our recommendation would be to start on August the 31st. And then that should be the only action item and only business on that agenda.
And I would also ask that any board members direct any questions to Dr. Davis or Mr. Anderson with regard to anything regarding the calendar, and that should cut down on the long-windedness as Dr. Elkins characterized for this meeting for next week, the special call board meeting for this one particular issue. So if those questions are asked ahead of time, then hopefully we won't have a very long meeting. All right, Ms. Mackey, and then Dr. Kausha Parker and Mrs. Agostini.
Actually, thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Davis has already addressed the calendar. I'd gotten some questions regarding Government Master's suggestion that we start sometime in September, and I wanted to make clear that it was just a suggestion, that that is ultimately our decision, and Ms. Spearman. And with regard to a special call board meeting, I know that teachers have been working laboriously to educate our kids electronically. Parents have been working with them. Everyone has been putting in time, overtime. We're elected to serve, and if we have to have another special call board meeting to deal with the crisis that we have at hand, to deal with that one issue. I'm in favor of the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Caution-Parker.
I agree with Mrs. Mackey. This issue of putting our children first has to be resolved. We have to put that first and resolve that, and our comfort second. But I'm glad to see we're going to go ahead and have that call meeting next week, so the schools can move ahead.
Mr. Shedd, let me just say something.
Hold on, Dr. Elkins.
No. I need to address, Mr. Shedd, please allow me to address this. First of all, my motto is putting students first, so it's not about comfort. Why don't you try to put some integrity first before you make a comment like that? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Agostini. Go ahead.
Well, and thank you so much, Mr. Shedd. I was going to say, I understand Dr. Elkins and her concern for too many the frequency of meetings we've been having, but this is, I find, a pressing issue. And so absolutely would support having a brief special called meeting next week.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
Thank you. And I completely agree with you, Mrs. Agostini. I completely agree.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manning. Hold on, Dr. Holmes. Mr. Manning.
Also, but I just made my point. But Dr. Caution-Parker, why don't you show a little respect during this time also? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Manning, thank you. You've been recognized.
Respect is not in your vocabulary.
Ladies.
It's not in yours either as an old lady.
Ladies.
Orange is becoming Dr. Monica Elkins Johnson.
Mr. Shedd, can you please call order?
Yes, absolutely. Order. All right, Mr. Manning, you've been recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Shedd. I appreciate it. Yeah, I think we need to have this meeting. Agreed that while it's certainly not optimal, I mean, staff is really working overtime. They're trying to get things to us in a timely manner, but I understand that sometimes this situation calls for special circumstances for additional meetings, such as this one, to get the work of the board and the work of the district done so that families and can make the decisions they need to make on the options they want to choose and the situations that they need to handle on their end. So I'm fully in support of us having this meeting, the additional meeting.
Mr. Shedd, let me say something, please.
Mr. Shedd, when you get an opportunity.
Okay. Hold on, Dr. Elkins. Go ahead, Dr. Holmes.
Yeah, I just want to say that I'm in favor of the meeting. If we need to move forward with the calendar, I think that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Elkins.
That was my point. I was asking a question initially, and then I said, if that's what we're going to do, I was okay with it. But I think some of you guys tried to take it out of proportion. I don't have a problem with meetings, but I don't want meetings that's going to carry over and then we add to the agenda. We've had issues where we've said we're going to have 1 and 2 items on the agenda, and then the agenda become extended. So having meetings is not my concern. I understand the importance of getting the calendar done, but I think some of you guys like to take it to the left, and there's no reason for that. Absolutely no reason to be ignorant sometimes.
All right, now we'll move on to item 8.6, the superintendent's update on COVID-19. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, and to our viewing public, I'll be brief with the COVID-19 update. If we spend quite a bit of time this evening, sharing with you update regarding our phased approach to reopening of schools. I want to begin by commending all of our employees who are working extremely hard this summer as we strive to provide premier learning experiences and prepare for the upcoming school year. All of your efforts in providing summer programs for students, the improvements of e-learning, teachers getting the training they need, and the mammoth work of the Richland 2 Reopening Schools Task Force has not gone unnoticed. To our parents, I cannot thank you enough for your active engagement and involvement. Your feedback and filling out our numerous surveys and asking questions have helped us throughout this entire process. I want everyone to know that you are appreciated and that our decisions will continue to be guided with the health and safety of each student and staff member at the forefront. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And now we move to any questions or comments with regard to Dr. Davis's update on COVID? All right. We now move to item 9.1, the draft agenda items for August 11th, 2020 board meeting. Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the board, to our viewing public, we have scheduled a regular scheduled board meeting for August the 11th, 2020. This board meeting will be conducted by Zoom. We will have a call to order at 4:30 where we will go into executive session. In executive session, currently we have on the agenda, the draft agenda, student appeals, which I believe we will not need. Student admission requests into the district's adult ed program. And we place these on a holder just in case something comes up somewhere while we still have students in programs like, some of our summer programs. We want to make sure that we have that just in case we need it. We'll have at 3.1 our inspirational moment and pledge of allegiance. We'll ask for the approval of this agenda. We'll have the consent agenda approval. We'll have voting items on executive session items if they're needed. We'll have old business and old business action requested, which will be the policy approval of BEDGA board records, as well as the policy approval of Title IX. We'll have new business or action requested. We'll continue to bring updates on the reopening of schools. We'll then present a new draft agenda for the August 25th board meeting. We'll ask for the approval of that agenda, followed by board and superintendent comments, executive session 2 if needed, voting on executive session 2 items, and adjournment. There is one omission to this that we need to add that I don't see unless I am missing it, and that is our public participation 1 and public participation number 2. And so we will add public participation 1 and public participation 2 to this agenda. I apologize for the oversight. As you know, we are in transition between our board secretary leaving, and now we have Ms. Avery Hart helping us. And so I think that was an oversight. So we will add that to our board agenda.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. We'll now move to item 10.1, the approval of the amended draft agenda, which will include the public participation.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. Mackey.
I move to approve the draft agenda for the August 11th, 2020 board meeting.
With the public participation included?
With the inclusion of public participation. Just one, right? Public participation 1, I believe, is what's been left off.
Yes. Okay,
yes, sir.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Dr. Holmes. Any discussion? Right.
Now, not discussion pertaining to this, but do we need to approve an agenda for our special call board meeting or not?
We typically don't approve the agenda for a special board meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
We haven't drafted the agenda yet.
Okay. That answers that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Now the point of question. Please register your votes at this time.
The vote is 6-1.
All right, thank you. Motion carries. Now we'll move to item 11.1, public participation 2. My understanding is...
Mr. Shad, I want to make sure that she saw my hand because I'm not sure if that's what she's calling a 6-1 vote.
Did you vote in the affirmative?
Yes. You know I'm doing a hand vote.
Yes, I saw your vote.
Okay,
Dr. Elkins Johnson.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, and now to 11.1 public participation 2. My understanding is that all the public participation was given in 6.1, and so there is no other public participation for this evening. We'll move to 12.1, board and superintendent comments, and I will go clockwise on my screen. Mrs. Agostini.
Thank you, Mr. Shad, excuse me, I'm tired. And thank you to all the presenters tonight for your thorough presentations. It's a lot to think about and a lot for everybody to absorb. And also a huge, huge thank you to all of those who have called, emailed, and for all of those who participated tonight in our public participation. I appreciate your advocacy for our students and our employees. So thank you so much for reaching out to all of us and sharing your thoughts, your concerns. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you. And Dr. Elkins.
Just want to thank everyone for your time. It's been a long night, and just thank you, and continue to wear your mask, be safe. And again, my motto is putting students first. I've always had that, will continue to have that. Call me if I can be of service to you, and thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you, Mr. Manning.
Yeah, I also want to thank all the presenters, Dr. Davis, all of your staff. Thank you so much for the amount of work that you put into the plan. And I know there's still a lot of questions that parents have as a parent, and I understand that the decisions that we have in front of us as parents are big ones as we think about the safety of our family and the safety of not just our teachers, but all of the staff, including our bus drivers and folks that serve meals and so many other maintenance folks, everybody in our district that's involved with our students and what it takes to educate those students. So I want to thank you all for that. I want to thank parents for their patience. It is confusing to hear the governor's words stating that it's a mandate when he did not actually, in fact, levy an official mandate. And then to hear the words from the president, to hear Molly Spearman differ, and then to hear our plan and all the plans of the different districts is very confusing for parents. And so, Livia, I know the communication efforts that we put in place there's a lot in front of us as we manage that, but I appreciate all the efforts as we come together. And certainly, Dr. Davis, to your point of the ever-changing plan, we know that at federal level, they're looking to change guidelines. There's potential money issues as additional funds are being looked at for districts and implications like we've seen with the governor giving private schools the money that had originally been intended to go to all schools to help facilitate and manage this problem. So the political games that are being played and the ever-changing landscape is a difficult one. And we as a board have to remain focused and remain dedicated in our attention and time as we work with staff on this issue. So I appreciate all of our board members and allowing staff the flexibility to do things like ask for special call board meetings to manage these issues that are extremely difficult that we have in front of us. So thank you to everyone, and I look forward. Mr. Shad, great job on managing your first, I think, full meeting as chair. Glad you're in that seat, brother.
Thank you,
Y'all
Mr.
have a good
Manning.
evening. Yeah.
Thank you. Mrs. Mackey?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as a reminder, there are 1,445 new confirmed cases of COVID yesterday, 2 new probable causes, 9 additional confirmed deaths, bringing the total as of yesterday of confirmed cases in our state to 71,213. Probable cases, 232, confirmed deaths, 1,147, and 17 probable deaths. My point in stating those stats is not to be macabre, but to remind us of the importance of what you're doing here, Dr. Davis and your staff and our teachers and our parents and our community members who are trying to find a way to rally around our babies, to keep them safely educated and our teachers educated, and the staff members and nurses and myriad support staff personnel who have to work to educate our kids. COVID-19 is a priority right now. There are lots of things that we have. There are lots of moving parts that make a district work, but I just want to keep the spotlight on that and praying for those families who've been affected, those who have been irreparably harmed by that, and just want to thank all the folks who are working with them to try to educate our babies and to keep the spotlight on what we're doing here. We have lots of priorities. I know at the beginning of each school year, we talk about our priorities, low, medium, and high, not that anything is technically low, but we have a lot of priorities, and this is public enemy number one right now. This is deadly disease. So thank you all for focusing on that with professionalism and tirelessly and working around the clock. It's a tough job, but I just wanted to acknowledge that. And for the people who are engaged in sending emails, we forward those on to the superintendent and his executive staff to get the appropriate answers. But thank you for sharing your concerns and questions to us, by email and by phone calls, so that we can route those to the appropriate people to get you the answers that you need. But just wanted to say thank you all, and just to keep a spotlight on what's important this evening. Y'all be blessed.
Thank you. Dr. Holmes.
Okay, I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for a great presentation, all the great presentations tonight. And to the parents, I know that this is a very, very, very difficult situation, and there is going to be no one answer. But I think that is very important for us to realize that our teachers, our custodians, our cafeteria workers, and et cetera, they're parents too, and they have children also. So I'm just going to say this and put it in a context. How many people would be willing to walk into a minefield? Now, the mines are there, but you don't know where they are, but you're going to walk in because someone told you you had to walk in. Would you willingly do it? And I think the answer to that question is most people would not. So we cannot ask our teachers and our faculty and our staff at these public schools, especially in a high school setting where children change classes several times during the day, and they're never with the same people during the day. It's much easier to isolate on an elementary and even on a middle school to some degree. But when you've got a high school student that's going through career center classes to et cetera, work studies, there's no way to separate them and then track where they have been. I think that we have to be mindful that people are doing things for political reasons. That same money that the governor spent today on private schools, nothing against private schools because people have choices, but that money could have been used in our public school because in rural areas where they do not, first of all, have things such as enough custodial staff to even address these issues. Money like that should have been used for those purposes. Now, that is my personal opinion on that. But as I said, ask yourself the question, how many would be willing to walk in a minefield? And if you can't say that you're willing to do that while we're in the red zone like we are, I don't think you should ask our public educational stakeholders to do so also. And thank you, and be safe.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Caution Parker.
Kudos to you, Dr. Holmes. You hit the nail on the head with that. You really did. These are some unprecedented times, and there's going to be a lot of confusion until we get through all of this. But again, like I said earlier, the kids. This is all about our children. But one thing that I shared with someone, that I really believe that this generation of children are going to be able to deal with a lot of issues far better than maybe one or two generations before them, because they're going through something that has never been experienced before, ever. So, and I want to thank you again, Dr. Davis, your team, all the people doing all this hard work, trying to make sure that teaching and learning continues to take place. And God bless all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Davis.
I want to start out by saying congratulations to Round Top Elementary Principal Janine Tucker. She has seen great success throughout her illustrious 40-year career and is now the 2020 recipient of the South Carolina Association of School Administrators Lifetime Achievement Award. She is one of 4 administrators in the state to receive this prestigious honor. So congratulations to you, Ms. Tucker, on that wonderful, well-deserved award. Scholarships are still rolling in for some of our recent graduates. Blythewood High School's McLean Brown joins the list of Richland 2 students receiving college-sponsored National Merit Scholarships. This brings the total of Richland 2 students receiving these scholarships to 8. Richland 2 Education Foundation has awarded college scholarships to 3 recent graduates. The Stephen W. Hefner Scholarship, which is worth $5,000, was awarded to Spring Valley High School's Vamsey's Gore Potty. And then the Deborah W. H. Ham Scholarship, which is worth $3,000, was awarded to Blythewood High School's Tillman Dillon. Spring Valley's Connor Merrick received the Michael J. Louder Scholarship, which is valued at $1,500. And the Dr. Hefner and Dr. Ham are former Richland 2 superintendents. The Michael Louder Scholarship honors the memory of Louder, a Spring Valley and Clemson University graduate. Annual registration is underway in Richland 2. A parent or guardian of all returning students is required to provide proof of residency, verifying student information, and completing the necessary forms for the current students who will be attending Richland 2 schools during the 2021 school year. And I would just like to leave our community and our staff and the whole entire Richland 2 family with this. I believe many of you have heard this before. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcomings, but who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasm, the great devotion, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly. So that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. On April 23rd, 1910, Theodore Roosevelt gave what became one of the most widely quoted speeches of his career. The former president, who left office in 1909, had spent a year hunting in Central Africa before embarking on a tour of Northern Africa and in Europe in 1910, attending events and giving speeches in places like Cairo, Berlin, Naples, and Oxford. He stopped in Paris on April 23rd, and at 3 p.m. at Sorbonne, Roosevelt delivered a speech called Citizenship in a Republic, which among some will come to be known as the man in the arena. In addition to touching on his own family history, war, human and property rights, the responsibility of citizenship, and France's falling birth rate, Roosevelt railed against cynics who looked down at men who were trying to make the world a better place. The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer, he said, a cynical habit of thought and speech, a readiness to criticize work, which the critic himself never tries to perform, an intellectual aloofness, which will not accept contact with life's reality. All these are marks not of superiority, but of weakness. We in Richland School District 2 will never waver from our pursuit to be premier. We will continue to put the best interests of our school community, our entire Richland 2 community first. We are together as we stand in this arena. We as a family, a school family, and a community are in this arena together, and we stand ready to get our face marred with dust, sweat, blood, and tears to ensure that all of our students, all of our teachers, all of our parents, and all members of our communities are being taken care of to our God-given best ability. That is the definition of being premier. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Davis. Parents, I understand. Teachers, I definitely understand. We are in trying times. We are in unprecedented times. And the decisions that are being made right now for our children, for our staff, they are critically important and they are not taken lightly. As the 1,700 or so pairs of eyes that are seeing us tonight, seeing your leadership talk about these matters, as you can see, as families sometimes do, we disagree. But as long as we keep the main thing, which is safety first, in my opinion. That's what truly matters. We're not going to please everyone. People, even inside their own household, have different views about what schools should look like this coming fall. My hope is that as a family, you may agree to disagree, but you always, again, make sure that the goal is what is best for our community. That might not be on everybody's certain time frame. It may not be ideal. What is ideal at this point? We are not necessarily in a new normal. We are in a great pause, but we still took that oath to make sure that we look out for every single child so that every single child would learn from an equity standpoint. We have leadership that we have selected, that the public has selected, and they are watching. And we are mindful of that as leaders. We must still be here to support one another, even when we disagree. We have to make sure that we keep the main thing the main thing. So I applaud Dr. Davis, his team, our team, the Board of Trustees, as we go through these chartered, uncharted waters together. We have to remain together. Again, our children are watching the behavior that we are modeling. Thank you, and y'all have a good night. So we are now at 15.1. I do not hear any objection by anyone, so I'm going to call this meeting adjourned at this time. You all have a great evening. Stay safe. And board members, I'll see you all next week.